Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1. The Coffin that ran down the road. It had been 20 years since my father died. 20 years of silence, of mourning, of trying to forget the way he passed so suddenly, without warning, on that rainy night. I still remember the sharp smell of wet earth in the air when I received the call. The kind of night where the clouds seemed to swallow everything in sight. He was driving home from work, just a few miles away from the house. I don't know if it was the storm or something else that made him lose control. They said it was a head-on collision, that his car had been wrecked beyond recognition. But the last thing I remember is the old black sedan parked in front of our house. I'm not sure why I haven't sold it. Maybe because it felt like the last piece of him I had left. Or maybe it was the way he always talked about that car. How it had been his pride, his escape, his sanctuary. It was old even when I was a child, but there was something about it that made it feel almost alive, a part of him. The car had been sitting in the garage for years after he passed. It had started to rust, the seats cracked, the tires deflated, but I couldn't bring myself to let it go. It was like a shrine, or maybe a tomb. I'd go out there from time to time, run my hand across the dust-covered hood, and imagine him behind the wheel again, telling me stories of the open road. That's why I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw it. There it was, parked right in front of my house. The same black sedan, with the same dent on the fender, the same rust-streaked paint, but it was impossible. I hadn't seen it in years, hadn't even thought about it. Yet, here it was, freshly parked under the dim street lamp. The engine was still warm, the exhaust pipe emitting faint wisps of smoke. The driver's seat, however, was empty. No one was inside. I dropped my mug. It shattered on the floor, but I didn't care. I stumbled toward the front door and yanked it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool night air hit me like a slap, and I was suddenly wide awake, hyper-aware of everything around me. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees in the yard. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that always feels heavy, like something is about to happen. I stepped out onto the porch, my eyes locked on the car. It wasn't just the sight of it that unsettled me. It was the feeling in the air. The whole street felt wrong, as if time had stopped, or worse, was turning backward. The car sat there, motionless, as if it had always been there. A trick of the light? A cruel joke? But no, this was real. I could feel the heat radiating off the hood, still warm to the touch. I moved closer, my feet dragging on the gravel driveway. My breath caught in my throat when I noticed something. There were fingerprints on the window, smudged marks like someone had been inside. My father's fingerprints. My mind immediately screamed at me to turn away, to run back inside and lock the door. But I couldn't. I had to know. The door creaked when I pulled it open. The smell inside hit me like a wave. Old leather, dust, and something else. Something sharp, metallic, like blood. I gagged but held my ground. I could feel my hands trembling, my skin tingling, as if 1,000 needles were prickling against me. It was like stepping into the past, but it was more than that. It was stepping into something that shouldn't exist anymore. I slid into the driver's seat, instinctively reaching for the old steering wheel. The seat was still warm, as if someone had just gotten out. A cold chill crept up my spine as I gripped the wheel, my mind racing. There was no way this could be happening. I had driven this car to the junkyard myself, years ago. I had watched it being towed away, the tow truck pulling it slowly out of the driveway like a body on a stretcher. So why was it back? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, but the air around me felt thick, suffocating. The sound of a door creaking open somewhere in the distance caught my attention. My eyes snapped open. I froze. I could hear someone walking in the yard, the crunch of their footsteps against the dry grass. My heart skipped a beat. "Dad?" I whispered, the name escaping my lips before I could stop it. I felt like an idiot the second it left my mouth, but the feeling in my chest was undeniable. There was something familiar about the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the rearview mirror. The reflection was distorted, flickering, as if someone or something was standing just outside the car. But when I turned around, there was no one there. The yard was empty. The footsteps stopped, but I could still feel the presence behind me. I could hear breathing now, shallow, heavy, as if someone was standing just a few inches away from me, their face close enough that I could almost feel their breath on my neck. I twisted the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life with a loud grinding noise. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, and the car lurched forward, tearing out of the driveway. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, standing at the edge of the yard. I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my back. I don't know why I drove. I couldn't stop myself. Maybe I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed. But as I drove down the road, the landscape around me began to change. The street lights flickered out one by one, until I was driving in total darkness. The road stretched out endlessly, with no sign of stopping. The familiar neighborhood that I had lived in for years was gone, replaced by nothing but an endless, empty stretch of pavement. I looked down at the dashboard. The time read 11:27 p.m. But when I glanced back up, the familiar road sign, the one that led to my house, was gone. The road ahead was unfamiliar, winding and twisting in ways I didn't recognize. Panic started to rise in my chest. What was happening? Where was I? The car began to shake, the wheels screeching against the pavement, as if they were struggling to maintain control. But I couldn't stop driving. I couldn't turn around. And then, in the distance, I saw it. My house. It stood there, just as I remembered it. But something was wrong. The lights were on, but the windows were empty. There was no movement, no sign of life. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just in front of my house. I sat there, staring at the house in disbelief, my heart racing. The door was still open, and I could hear the faint echo of footsteps in the distance. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of someone whispering my name. It was my father's voice, but there was no one there. I don't know how long I sat there in the car, parked just outside my house, staring at the lights inside. My heart was pounding in my ears, the rhythm of it almost deafening. I kept telling myself that it was just a dream, that everything I'd seen, the car, the footsteps, the whispers, was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something wasn't right. Something was in that car, in that house, and it wasn't my father. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked over my shoulder at the rearview mirror, but all I saw was the empty driveway. The night was still, far too still for comfort. The kind of quiet that fills the space with something sinister. There was no sound of crickets, no wind rustling through the trees. Nothing. Just an eerie silence that pressed against my eardrums, suffocating me. I didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But when I finally gathered the courage to step out of the car, it was like I was stepping into a different world. The air had grown colder. The familiar surroundings of my neighborhood had faded into a haze, as if I were trapped in a fog. I looked toward my house. The lights were still on, but the windows, they didn't look the same. They seemed darker, more shadowed, too shadowed, like they were hiding something. A chill ran down my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around and walk away. Something compelled me to move forward. I approached the front door, my breath coming in short gasps. The feeling of dread that had taken hold of me was impossible to ignore now. My hand reached for the doorknob, but just as I touched it, I heard something behind me. Soft like footsteps, but too slow, too deliberate. My heart stopped. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. I should have turned and ran. I should have called someone, called the police. But I didn't. I stepped inside the house, my senses heightened, every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet echoing too loudly. The lights flickered above, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The living room, the hallway, it all seemed off. It was as if I had entered a place frozen in time. Nothing had changed in 20 years. The same furniture, the same pictures on the walls. The old grandfather clock ticked in the corner, but the hands weren't moving. They were stuck at midnight, frozen. I swallowed hard. I needed to figure out what was happening. I needed answers. But where to begin? I walked through the house, opening doors that had remained shut for years, looking for something, anything, that would make sense of what was going on. The silence was oppressive. I couldn't hear anything. No hum of the fridge. No sound of my footsteps. It was as if the world had closed in around me, shutting me off from everything else. I stopped in front of my father's study. It used to be his sanctuary, his retreat after work, where he'd read, write, or tinker with old mechanical gadgets. I hadn't stepped foot inside in years, not since the night he passed away. Something about that room unsettled me. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dark, save for the pale light creeping in from the hallway. The air inside felt different, stale, heavy. My eyes immediately landed on the desk in the corner. It was covered in dust, just like everything else. But there, in the center of it, was a small object I hadn't seen before. A black and white photograph, face down. I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the cool wood of the desk as I reached for it. As I turned the photo over, my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of my father, standing beside the car. The same black sedan, But this time, it wasn't just him. There was someone else. A woman. Her face was partially obscured, but her eyes. I could see her eyes clearly. They were dark, hollow, empty. I quickly placed the photo down, my pulse quickening. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to entertain the idea that my father had been involved with someone else. Someone I didn't know. But I couldn't ignore the sick feeling that churned in my stomach. Something was wrong with this picture. It was too out of place. I stood there for a long time, trying to collect myself. But the longer I stared at that photo, the more uneasy I became. I had to leave. I needed to get out of this house, away from whatever this was. I spun on my heel and hurried toward the door. But just as I reached it, I heard a noise. A soft creak, like the sound of a floorboard shifting under weight. I froze. The sound was coming from behind me, from inside the study. I slowly turned around, my heart hammering in my chest. There, in the doorway, was a figure, a shadow. I couldn't make out its features, but I could see the shape of it. Tall, thin, standing completely still. It was watching me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. I could feel its presence. The air around me growing colder, heavier, like something was suffocating me. And then it stepped forward. The shadow moved with unnerving speed, crossing the room in a single step. My breath hitched in my throat as I stumbled backward. The figure reached out, its hand cold, skeletal, and wrong. It grasped my wrist, the touch sending a shockwave of ice through my body. I jerked away, but the grip tightened. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls were bending, warping. I could see them breathing, alive with an energy I couldn't comprehend. "You shouldn't have come back," a voice whispered. It wasn't my father's voice. It was deep, guttural, distorted. The words felt like they were tearing at my soul, and I fought the urge to collapse. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free from the thing's grasp. My back hit the wall, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. My vision blurred, my thoughts scattered, but when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. I couldn't understand what was happening. What was that thing? Was it real? Or was I losing my mind? I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was going on, it wasn't over. I wasn't alone in this house anymore. And the thing that had been watching me, it wasn't my father. But who, or what, was it? The morning after I encountered the shadow, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. The air was thick with dread, but when I stepped outside, the world seemed completely unchanged. The sky was a pale blue, the sun creeping slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. It looked like any other morning, but I felt like I was trapped in some sort of waking nightmare. The house was silent, its familiar stillness mocking me, like it had always been this way. Empty, abandoned, like nothing had ever really changed. I hadn't slept at all. The memory of the figure, the cold touch, and that whisper, "You shouldn't have come back," kept echoing in my head. It replayed like a broken record, the voice sending a chill through my bones. It wasn't my father. I knew that now. Whoever or whatever it was, it wasn't human. I thought about calling someone, anyone. But who would I call? Who could I tell? How could I explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I was the one losing my mind or if something truly was out of place. I tried to push the thoughts away as I walked back to the driveway, but there it was again. The car, the black sedan, sitting there, just like it had the night before. Its engine was still warm, its presence impossible to ignore. I hadn't imagined it, had I? There was no way I could have. I had seen it, touched it, felt the warmth of it. But what was it doing here? Why was it back? And more importantly, why did it feel like something was waiting for me inside? The driveway felt like a prison. The car's shadow stretching out across the pavement, drawing me toward it. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. My mind was screaming at me to get back inside, to run away and never look back, but my feet betrayed me. I was walking toward it again, like some sort of moth drawn to a flame. I reached the driver's side door, my hand shaking as I gripped the handle. The cool metal sent a jolt through my body as I opened it. The seat was warm again. The scent of leather and dust filled the air. But there was something else there too. Something metallic, like blood. Or something far worse. I slid into the seat, my pulse racing. The dashboard was cracked in places, and the radio still had static, just like it used to. My father loved that damn car. He'd always tinkered with it, kept it running long after it should have been in the junkyard. I remember him talking about how the car was more than just a vehicle to him. It was a memory. It was him. I forced myself to start the engine, hoping that maybe this was just some bizarre illusion. The engine roared to life, the familiar hum vibrating through the steering wheel. The car felt alive, like it was pulling me forward, like it was alive in a way that no car should be. I was still unsure of what was happening, but I couldn't stop. I drove. The streets I passed looked wrong. They weren't the same. The houses, the trees, even the street signs, they were all in the wrong places. I didn't remember them being here. I didn't recognize anything around me. I slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't stop. It kept moving forward, as if it had a mind of its own. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A figure, standing at the edge of the road. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart pounded. I couldn't take my eyes off the road. Couldn't focus on anything other than the feeling of something closing in on me. The car, the streets, the town. It all felt like it was shifting around me, changing in ways that didn't make sense. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I couldn't stop. I didn't even know where I was going. I didn't even know if I was still in the same town. The landscape was changing again. The houses were disappearing, replaced by empty fields, forests, and strange, dilapidated buildings I'd never seen before. I kept driving, unable to slow down. And then, without warning, the car came to a halt. It wasn't a normal stop. It was like the brakes had been slammed on by someone else. Someone who was controlling the vehicle from the inside. I looked around. There was no sign of my house anymore. No familiar landmarks. Just an empty stretch of road leading into a forest. The trees towered above me, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady. The air was thick with mist, and the ground felt damp beneath my shoes. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but nothing made sense. The road was gone. The car was gone. I was surrounded by dense trees that seemed to close in on me with every step. Where the hell am I? The question hung in the air, unanswered. My chest tightened as the sense of being watched crept over me again. I wasn't alone out here. I could feel it. I could hear the faintest sounds, soft rustling, distant whispers, and the feeling of movement in the shadows. I turned, startled by a sudden noise behind me. Something, or someone, was approaching, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. I didn't wait to see who it was. I broke into a run, my feet slipping on the wet ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast I ran, the feeling of being pursued never faded. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, and the whispers became clearer. They were calling my name. The voices, distorted and hollow, echoed through the trees, filling the air with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw it. There, ahead of me, was my father's car, again. How had it gotten here? Why was it here? It was parked in the middle of the clearing, its headlights dim but still glowing, casting long shadows on the ground. And standing beside it was the figure from the study, the one I had seen in the doorway. It was tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed red, like embers in the night, and its mouth twisted into a sickening grin. You shouldn't have come back. The voice was the same, the words chilling me to my core. The figure took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. What it was holding in its hands. It was my father's watch. The one he had worn every day, the one he'd always told me never to lose. The figure raised the watch, its face cracked and worn, and in a voice that felt like it was coming from everywhere, at once, it whispered again, "You're already too late." I couldn't move. The air was thick with a suffocating force, pulling me toward the figure. And then, just as I thought I was going to lose myself to whatever dark force was at work, the car's engine roared to life behind me. The headlights blazed bright, blinding me for a moment. And when I looked back at the figure, it was gone. But the car was still there. Story 2. Call from the Grave. I had always been a skeptic. If someone had told me that my brother would be calling me from beyond the grave, I would have laughed in their face. But that was before it happened. Before everything unraveled into something I couldn't explain. It was an evening like any other. The kind where the world outside is bathed in the dimming light of sunset, and the day's work is behind me. I had just poured myself a glass of wine, the soft chime of the clock marking the end of another long day. It had been 4 years since Daniel's death. 4 years since I buried him, right there, under that cold earth, in the small town of Waverley. He had been my older brother, brash, impulsive, always the life of the party, but he was gone. Just gone, taken in an instant when that car had swerved off the road and into the trees. I had held his hand as he died, the last breath he took still lingering in the memory of my fingers. It was supposed to be the worst day of my life, and for a while, it was. But as time passed, I learned to live with the empty space he left behind. So when the phone rang that evening, I didn't think much of it at first. Not until I saw the name on the caller ID. Daniel. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the glass of wine, the blood draining from my face. It wasn't possible. I hadn't saved his number. His phone had been turned off. his entire life packed into a box and buried in the cemetery next to the rest of his remains. I had watched them lower him into the ground, that awful, final image of him trapped in that dark box for eternity. I pressed the screen, hesitating, afraid that somehow the phone had malfunctioned or some sort of cruel joke was being played. But the ringing continued. I answered. "Hello?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. A silence answered me, deep and thick, like the weight of a tombstone settling in. Then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard it, a voice, distant but unmistakable. "Rena, hi, it's me, Danny." I froze. My entire body went rigid, as though my very soul was being held in place by invisible chains. That voice, soft, desperate, strained, sounded like Daniel, but no, it couldn't be him. He was dead. His body was in the grave, under a stone that marked the final place of his existence. "Danny, this isn't funny. Who is this?" My words trembled, my stomach tightening with each passing second. "I'm not joking, Rena. You have to listen to me." There was a slight crack in his voice, something I hadn't heard since the night he was in that car accident. "Something's wrong. They buried me with it." I felt the world around me shift. The air, once still and calm, now felt thick with an unspoken presence. My hand gripped the phone so tightly, I was afraid it might crack under the pressure. "What are you talking about? Buried with what?" "It's in the grave," he said again, his voice urgent now, desperate. "It's still there. The phone. The phone's still on, Rena. They didn't bury it properly." A chill ran down my spine. I staggered back from the kitchen counter, my mind scrambling to make sense of the words. I could hear him breathing now, sharp and uneven. "What do you mean the phone's still on?" I whispered. My throat felt tight, like it was constricting around a ball of ice. "How? That's impossible." "I don't know, but it's still there. It's been calling me. It won't stop." "Rena, you have to come. Please, you have to dig me up." His voice faltered, and for a moment, I thought I heard a cry. A sob almost swallowed by static. My pulse quickened, my hands shaking as I pressed the phone to my ear. "Please." His voice was barely audible now, the sound of it disappearing like smoke in the wind. "Hurry." The line went dead. Silence. A deafening kind of silence that lasted too long. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. I don't know how much time passed before I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for the sound of something, anything, to break through the oppressive quiet. But there was nothing. I ended the call, though I had no idea what to do next. Part of me wanted to call the police, tell them about the strange, impossible phone call I'd just received. But the other part, an even bigger part, refused to acknowledge what had just happened. My mind was screaming at me that it couldn't be real, that the dead don't call, that this was some kind of sick joke. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something had been disturbed. The phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up before the first ring could echo through the empty house. "Rena." It was him. It was Daniel's voice. But this time, the sound was different, fainter, as though he was speaking from far away, from beneath layers of earth. "Danny?" My voice trembled as I whispered his name into the phone. "What is happening? What do you want from me?" I didn't want this to happen," he said, his voice crackling with static. It's in the grave. The thing in the grave. It's calling to me. I... I can't get out. The line went silent again, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I don't know what happened after that. I felt a surge of panic, my legs giving way beneath me. I sank to the floor, clutching the phone like it was my only tether to reality. And then, without any warning, the thought hit me like a thunderclap. What if it wasn't Daniel calling me from beyond the grave? What if something else, something worse, was calling me in his place? What if that phone, the one they'd buried with him, wasn't just some forgotten relic of a dead man's life? What if it had somehow become a conduit? A bridge between the living and the dead? The thought lingered in my mind, pressing against my skull like a growing migraine. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe any of it. But deep down, something told me I had no choice. The grave was calling, and I had to answer. The phone rang again. But this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to pick it up. The phone lay silent on the counter. After the last call, I had become paralyzed, unsure whether to face the dark abyss of what was happening or to pretend it was all some kind of twisted nightmare. My heart raced in my chest, and each breath felt like it was being suffocated by the weight of the moment. I looked at the phone, Daniel's phone, the one I had last held in my hands as we buried him. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to begin understanding any of it. Everything about the past few hours felt like I was living in a horror movie. Something this bizarre couldn't be real, could it? I stood there, staring at the phone, my hands trembling in the cool air. The house around me felt unnervingly still, as though time had frozen in place, caught between the seconds that had just passed and those yet to come. I glanced out the window to the darkening street outside. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding within my walls. But I wasn't at peace, not anymore. The ringing in my ears had taken the place of the silence, and it gnawed at me, pulling me deeper into a sea of dread. Then, as though drawn by some magnetic force, I picked up the phone. It was dark. My fingers pressed the screen as if possessed, and the screen flickered to life. There was no number now, only the name Daniel flashing in bold letters. The sound of static crackled in my ear, filling the room like the hum of an old broken radio. Hello? My voice was weak, a shadow of its former strength. There was no answer, just that familiar eerie silence, until the voice came again. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably his, Daniel's voice. Rena, I'm sorry. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I could barely breathe as I stood frozen in place. He hadn't said that before. The first time he had called, it had been frantic, full of fear, but now it was calm, almost too calm. Danny, are you really there? I asked, my voice cracking. The static on the other end intensified, and for a moment, I thought I might hear nothing at all. But then, his voice returned, distant yet clearer, like he was speaking through a veil. I never wanted to scare you, but I don't know how to get out. They won't let me go, Rena. My heart stopped. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I held the phone tighter, almost as though I could physically pull him back into the world of the living with my grip. Who, Danny? Who's not letting you go? My voice was barely a whisper now. There was a long pause. Then his voice, quieter, as if something were moving in the background, said, It's in the ground with me. The thing that won't let me leave. It keeps calling me. My stomach twisted into knots. I felt the sharp pang of fear dig into my gut. A voice in the back of my mind screamed at me to hang up, to disconnect from whatever madness had gripped my brother's phone. But I couldn't. I couldn't walk away. Please, he continued, the faintest of sobs slipping through. I need you to listen to me. You have to find it. You have to find the phone in the grave, Rena. The phone in the grave. His words echoed in my mind like a chant, building in intensity with each repetition. He had mentioned the phone before, but now the words felt different, more urgent, more real. Why didn't you tell me this before? I demanded, my voice rising with panic. Why didn't you tell me what was in the grave when I buried you? I didn't know. I didn't know it was there. Daniel's voice sounded pained, tortured. But I remember. It's inside me now, Rena. It's inside the grave. I can't leave. I need you to dig me up. Tears pricked my eyes, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. My thoughts were consumed by the words he spoke, by the haunting realization that I might have buried something, someone that was not entirely my brother. The thought of digging him up, of opening that coffin again, sent a wave of nausea through me. But I knew, deep in the pit of my stomach, that I couldn't ignore him. Not again. Not after all that had happened. I'll do it. I'll come. I'll dig you up. My voice was hoarse as I spoke the words. But before I could say another word, the line went dead. The silence that followed felt more suffocating than anything I had ever experienced. My hands were slick with sweat as I held the phone in a tight grip, my breath ragged. I couldn't let the phone call end like this. I had to do something. I had to know what was going on. I ran to the door, throwing it open, but the night air didn't seem to calm my racing heart. The street was dark, empty, nothing but shadows creeping along the sidewalks. I rushed to my car, fumbling with the keys as the weight of my brother's words pressed down on me. The cemetery was only a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime. As I drove, my mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle, the phone, the strange things Daniel had said. What could he have meant by the phone in the grave? And why was it still on? Why had the grave become a prison for him? The night grew colder as I approached the cemetery. I parked in the same spot where I had parked 4 years ago. The night I had buried Daniel. The cemetery looked the same, peaceful in the moonlight. But there was something wrong about it tonight. Something out of place. The wind whispered through the trees, and the ground seemed darker, more ominous than I remembered. I could feel the weight of the air pressing against me, urging me to turn around, to go home. But I couldn't. I had to know. I walked past the rows of tombstones, my footsteps muffled on the cold grass, and made my way to Daniel's grave. The gravestone stood there, untouched by time, still etched with his name and the dates of his birth and death. But as I knelt beside it, something didn't feel right. The earth above his resting place was uneven, as though someone had disturbed it recently. I swallowed hard, the dread pooling in my stomach like ice. The phone. I had to find it. Grabbing the shovel from the back of my car, I dug into the earth, each strike of the metal against the soil resonating in the quiet night. The air felt charged, thick with tension, as if something watched me from the shadows. My breath came faster with each shovelful of dirt that I cast aside. And then, just as the tip of the shovel hit something hard. My heart lurched. I froze. I wasn't sure if it was fear or some strange premonition that stopped me, but I couldn't move. I looked at the hole I had dug, and there, buried beneath the soil, was the unmistakable outline of a small, black object, shiny, almost too perfect for something buried for years. It was his phone. Terror rushed through me like an electric shock as I pulled it from the earth, my hands trembling. The phone was cold, impossibly cold to the touch, as though it had been frozen in time. I turned it over, and before I could even register the weight of it in my hands, the screen lit up. A new message flashed across the screen. "You should have never dug me up." I dropped the phone, and in the distance, I heard a voice. It wasn't Daniel's. I don't remember much of the walk back to the car. Everything was a blur, my hands trembling, my mind spinning with the impossibility of it all. I could barely comprehend what had just happened. My brother's phone, the phone that had been buried with him, was still alive, still sending me messages. And the moment it had lit up in my hands, I had felt the sharp sting of dread settle deep into my bones. Something was wrong, something worse than I could have ever imagined. I shoved the phone into my jacket pocket, not wanting to look at it, but unable to leave it behind. I didn't know if I was supposed to be scared of it, of what it meant, or if I was supposed to be relieved that I had finally found it. But the message, it still lingered in my mind. "You should have never dug me up." That wasn't my brother. It couldn't have been. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who would leave a message like that, not even from the grave. He wasn't a prankster, not in the way that would make him play tricks from beyond death. He was dead. The reality of it hit me like a blow to the chest. But that voice, that wasn't him. It couldn't have been. I got into the car and started the engine, my eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the empty road ahead. I drove without thinking, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just the fear that was eating away at me. It was the need to understand. What was going on? What had happened to Daniel? I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away from the cemetery. The farther I drove, the harder it became to breathe. The weight of everything was too much, and I needed to clear my head. But the message, the phone, kept ringing in my mind. "You should have never dug me up." And that voice, faint but clear, echoing through the silence of the night. I needed answers, and so I found myself driving toward the one place that might hold the key to understanding what was happening. The old house. It had been years since I had visited the house we grew up in. Daniel and I hadn't been children when we left, but our memories of the house still haunted me. The faded wallpaper, the creaking floors, the scent of old wood and dust that filled every corner. It was a relic of our childhood, a place where we had lived before everything changed. I pulled up to the house, parking in the long gravel driveway. The place looked abandoned, the front porch sagging beneath the weight of years gone by. The windows were dark, no light shining from within. The house, once a place of laughter and warmth, now felt like a tomb for our past, for all the things we had lost. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I approached the front door. The wind had picked up, swirling the fallen leaves around me, creating eerie whispers in the night. I reached for the door handle, hesitated for a moment, and then pushed it open. The air inside the house was cold, stale, as if no one had lived there for a long time. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out years ago. The only light in the room came from the faint glow of the moon through the broken curtains. I walked through the house, the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet making my stomach churn. The living room was the same as I remembered, dusty, empty, except for the old furniture covered in sheets. It felt like I was walking through a time capsule, but something was wrong. The silence was oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I moved upstairs, my footsteps slow, deliberate, as if each step brought me closer to a place I wasn't sure I wanted to go. The hallway was narrow, lined with old photographs and paintings, images of happier times before everything fell apart. My parents, Daniel and me, all frozen in time. I paused in front of the door to Daniel's old room. The door was cracked open, as if inviting me in. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before I pushed the door open. The room was just as it had been when Daniel had left for the last time. The bed was unmade, the sheets rumpled. The walls were covered with posters of bands and sports teams, remnants of the person he had been. But something about the room felt wrong. It felt like he was still here, like his presence lingered in the air. I stepped further into the room, and that's when I saw it. On the desk, there was a small wooden box, something I hadn't seen before. It was intricately carved, the wood smooth to the touch. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. As soon as I touched the box, I felt a strange sensation, like electricity running through my veins. My heart skipped a beat, and I opened the box, almost afraid of what I might find. Inside was a photograph of Daniel. But it wasn't just any photograph. It was a picture of him standing at the cemetery, the day of his burial. The photo was grainy, old, as if it had been taken years ago. Daniel was standing next to the grave, his face obscured by shadow. But in the background, I could see the freshly dug earth, the grave that now contained his body. There was something strange about the picture, a sense of unease that washed over me as I stared at it. I slammed the box shut, my heart pounding in my chest. What was this? Why was it here? Suddenly, the phone in my pocket vibrated. I froze. I pulled the phone out and stared at the screen. A new message. I told you not to dig me up. The words sent a chill down my spine, and the air in the room grew colder. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the sound of my own breath felt deafening in the silence. The photo, the box, the phone. Everything seemed to be tied together in some way I couldn't explain. And then, a thought struck me, sharp as a knife. Had Daniel been trying to tell me something before he died? Was this phone, this cursed phone, part of some message he had been trying to send? Or was it something more sinister? Something darker? I backed away from the desk, my eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. The wind howled outside, the house creaking under the pressure. And then, from the darkness in the corner of the room, I heard it. A voice. But this time, it wasn't coming from the phone. It came from the shadows, from a place I couldn't see. You shouldn't have come here. I froze. The voice was cold, familiar, but not Daniel's. It was deep, guttural, unnatural. I turned toward the corner of the room, my body frozen in fear. The shadows seemed to ride, shifting in ways they shouldn't have. And then, I saw it, a figure, standing just out of the light, its features obscured by darkness. But I could feel its presence pressing against me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood. I hadn't just disturbed the grave. I had opened a door that was never meant to be opened. And whatever was on the other side of that door was now awake. "Leave, before it's too late," the voice whispered again. A sound like the rustling of dead leaves. I didn't wait for another word. I turned and ran. Story 3. Traces of Death. There's something about living in the desert that makes you believe in the simplicity of life. The vast, endless stretch of sand, the sun's unforgiving heat, and the way the silence clings to the air. It makes you feel like you're in control of your world. But that was before the teeth marks started appearing on the window. Before the world I thought I understood began to twist. Slowly and surely, into something unrecognizable. My name is Stephen Marsh. I live with my wife Emma and our 2 kids, Claire and Ben, in a small, isolated house on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. We moved here for the peace, for the quiet life. I was an engineer, used to the hum of city traffic, the rush of deadlines. But the desert had a way of slowing things down. It had a strange, tranquil pull that drew you in. At first, it was exactly what we needed. The kids had space to roam. Emma could tend to her garden, and I could breathe again, away from the chaos of work and the city. But as with all things, peace never lasts forever. The first time we saw it, I was sitting in the living room, reading through some work emails on my laptop. Emma was in the kitchen, humming to herself while she prepared dinner. The kids were outside, playing in the dusty yard. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows over the arid landscape. I remember their way. The light hit the glass of the second-floor window, turning it into a mirror that reflected the fading glow of day. That's when I noticed it. A mark. Not just any mark, but a large, jagged indentation. The kind you'd expect from something with massive, sharp teeth. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just some random dirt or debris, a trick of the light. I stood up and walked over to the window, intending to wipe it off. But then my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't dirt. The marks were unmistakable. Huge, deep indentations, spaced evenly apart, as if something with enormous fangs had pressed itself against the glass. They weren't scratches. They were marks shaped like teeth. And they weren't on the outside of the window, where the wind or the sand might have caused them. No. They were on the inside. I took a step back, my mind racing. I looked out the window, expecting to see something that might explain this. But all I saw was the barren desert stretching out toward the horizon. Nothing but dust and scrub brush for miles. There was no animal tall enough, no creature that could leave a mark like that. And there was no way for anyone to reach that height. Our house was 2 stories high, isolated, and there was nothing out there that could possibly explain it. I called Emma over, my voice unsteady. She came in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I pointed at the window, and her face instantly paled. She didn't need to ask what I was talking about. She could see it too. The marks were clear, unmistakable. Her eyes darted to the window, and then to the empty desert outside. What is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. but I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. We spent the rest of the evening trying to make sense of it, but we couldn't. The more we talked about it, the more absurd it sounded. The kids had been outside playing all day, but they hadn't noticed anything. I made sure to check the perimeter of the house, convinced there must be some logical explanation. Maybe a prank? Maybe an animal had somehow climbed up there. Though I couldn't fathom how. But I couldn't find a single clue. The desert was as still as it always had been, and nothing was out of place. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the teeth marks, to the way they looked, too precise, too deliberate. I kept thinking of the stories I'd heard growing up, of things that stalked the edges of reality, things that crept in during the darkest hours. Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination, but there was something about those marks that felt wrong. The next day, the marks were gone. I couldn't believe it. I went straight to the window, heart pounding, and there was nothing. No trace of the teeth, no indentation, no sign that anything had ever been there. I checked every inch of the window, convinced I had imagined it, but it was gone, as if it had never existed at all. I told myself it was a fluke, some strange, inexplicable thing. But it wasn't long before the second set of marks appeared. It was the following week when I saw them again. This time, I was in the garage, cleaning out the tool shed. I had left Emma and the kids inside, preparing for dinner. As I worked, I kept hearing faint noises, almost like tapping, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The wind can do strange things in the desert after all. When I went upstairs to grab something, I saw it again. The marks, this time, more pronounced, deeper, as if they had been freshly made. They weren't just on one window either. They were on all of the windows on the second floor. I could feel my heart race, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. There was no mistaking it now. I ran downstairs to Emma, grabbing her by the arm, but I couldn't get the words out. She knew instantly, her eyes wide with fear. We both went to the window together, and I saw her hands tremble as she touched the glass. It was too real, too frightening to ignore now. I went outside, thinking maybe I could find some clue that would make sense of this. Maybe there was something, anything, that could explain what we were seeing. But the desert was as empty as it had always been. The ground was cracked and dry, the brush dead and scattered. There were no footprints, no claw marks, no signs of life. Only the relentless heat and the vast, oppressive silence. When I returned to the house, I found the marks had faded again, as though they were never there. But this time, the fear had a new edge to it. Something wasn't right. Emma felt it too. She started locking the windows at night, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever was out there, whatever was leaving those marks, was not something we could escape from by closing ourselves inside. The truth was, I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and unknown was trying to get in. Something that had found us deep in the heart of the desert. And it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. Every night after that, I could hear it, the tapping, soft at first, almost like a whisper in the dark, then louder, more persistent, until I could no longer ignore it. The scratching, the gnawing, the sound of teeth against glass. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What was it? What did it want? And why had it come for us? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for certain. The desert was no longer the peaceful, silent place I had once believed it to be. It had become a place where the unexplainable was waiting, watching. And whatever it was out there, just beyond the glass. I hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Each day, the unease in my chest grew heavier, pressing down on me like the relentless heat of the desert sun. There was a tension in the air, an electric charge that lingered just out of reach, teasing me with the promise of something I couldn't quite grasp. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for us to slip up, to make the wrong move. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. I'd hear noises in the night, soft scratching, like nails tapping against glass. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, the shifting of the desert sands, or maybe even a bird, though nothing in the desert should have been capable of making those kinds of sounds. But deep down, I knew better. My mind kept returning to the marks on the windows, to the way they appeared so suddenly, so unnervingly, and then vanished without a trace. How could I explain that? How could I pretend it wasn't happening? Emma tried to stay calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't say it out loud, but I could feel it. The dread that was creeping up on both of us, slowly suffocating everything in its path. The kids were no better. Claire had started having nightmares again, her sleep disturbed by things she couldn't articulate, but that seemed all too familiar to her. Ben had stopped going outside at dusk, his bright, curious spirit dimmed by something he couldn't explain but instinctively feared. That night, the house felt more suffocating than usual. The silence weighed heavily on us, broken only by the creak of the floorboards and the occasional whisper of the wind outside. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the empty horizon, my mind racing. What could I do? Where could I turn? There were no answers to be found. The desert, with its vast oppressive silence, gave nothing away. Stephen, Emma's voice broke through my thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes filled with that same fear that had been growing between us. The marks are back. I didn't move. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind scrambled for an explanation, anything that would make sense of this madness, but all I could do was nod, feeling the weight of the air around me. I didn't need her to say anything more. I knew what was happening. We both walked to the second floor window, the same one where the marks had first appeared. As I stood before it, my eyes scanning the glass, my heart skipped a beat. There they were, clearer than before. The teeth marks, jagged and deep, pressed into the window with the same unnatural precision. They were fresh, as if something had just left them there. Moments ago, I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the glass. The cool surface sent a shiver up my spine, but it was the marks that froze me. They weren't like anything I had ever seen before. No animal, no force of nature could have made them. They were deliberate. There was an intelligence behind them, something that made my skin crawl. I turned to Emma, my voice barely a whisper. What is this? What is happening to us? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer to the window, her breath shallow as she examined the marks. We need to leave, she said, her voice cracking. "This place isn't safe anymore." I didn't argue. I wanted to leave too. But where could we go? The desert was all we had. It was all we knew. And as much as I wanted to escape, I knew deep down that running wouldn't help. Whatever this thing was, it had found us, and it wasn't going to let us go that easily. The next morning, I decided to do what I should have done weeks ago. I went to the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Tyler Hayes was a grizzled man in his late 50s, known around town for his no-nonsense attitude and an uncanny ability to get to the bottom of things. I had heard rumors about strange happenings in the desert, but I had always dismissed them as nothing more than ghost stories. After all, this was the 21st century. We didn't believe in things like that anymore, but sitting across from Sheriff Hayes in his dusty office, the weight of the marks on the window gnawing at me, I found myself second-guessing everything I had ever believed. "Sheriff, I need your help," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. "Something strange is happening at my house. I don't know how to explain it, but there are marks on our windows, teeth marks, and they keep coming back." He didn't look surprised. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he regarded me with a calm, almost distant expression. "I've heard stories," he said, his voice gravelly. "People don't talk about them much, but they're there. The marks. They've been showing up for years now, and the things that make them, well, they don't follow the rules of nature. Whatever it is, it's not from this world." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "What are you saying? You know what it is?" Hayes looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Not exactly, but I know what's been happening around here. People see things out in the desert. Strange things. Some say it's the wind. Some say it's a pack of animals. But I've got my own theory. I think whatever's leaving those marks, whatever's out there, is older than anything we know. Something ancient, something that's been here long before we built our homes." He paused, his gaze intense. "And it's waking up." I didn't know what to say to that. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of something I couldn't quite understand. Ancient? Waking up? It sounded insane. But looking back at the sheriff, the grim set of his jaw, the way he was watching me like I was the next to see it for myself, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. "I've heard rumors," Hayes continued, his voice low, almost reverent. "People who've seen the thing that leaves those marks. They say it's not a creature at all. Not in the traditional sense. It's something else. Something that belongs to a time long gone." I was about to ask him more, to dig deeper into what he meant, but something in his expression stopped me. It was a look I recognized. Fear. Real fear. The kind that you don't see every day. He stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the desert. "I'm telling you, son, whatever it is, it doesn't care about us. It's been here far too long, and it's not going anywhere. You're not the first to see the marks, and you won't be the last. Just don't let it get any closer." I left his office with a feeling of dread gnawing at my insides, but the sheriff's warning stuck with me. Something was out there, something ancient, something waiting. As the sun set over the horizon, I returned to the house, the image of the teeth marks still fresh in my mind. I didn't know what had found us, or why it was coming for us, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to face whatever was lurking in the desert, and I had no idea how to stop it. That night, I locked every door and shuttered every window, but I knew in my gut that it wouldn't matter. The desert had already found us, and we were trapped, waiting for the next mark to appear. Days blurred together as the sense of dread clung to me like the desert dust that coated everything in its path. The marks on the windows had become a constant presence, and with each new set, the feeling that something was drawing closer intensified. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The desert wasn't just a barren, quiet place. It was alive with something ancient, something that hadn't forgotten us. Emma tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She took to cooking meals and keeping the house tidy, as if the ordinary could somehow shield us from the horror that was unfolding. But even her efforts couldn't stop the unease that filled the air. Claire's nightmares grew worse. The little girl who once asked me to tell her stories before bed now begged to sleep with us, terrified of what lay just outside the window. And Ben had stopped playing outside altogether. His wild imagination had given way to a silence that made my stomach twist. He didn't speak much anymore, but when he did, his words were disjointed, filled with thoughts that didn't make sense. "It watches," he would whisper. "It watches from the other side." I didn't know what to make of his words, but every fiber of my being screamed in protest. I knew this was all connected. The marks, the sounds, the whispers in the dark. It was late one evening when I first heard it. The unmistakable scrape of nails against glass. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book to pass the time, the lamp casting a soft yellow glow across the room. Emma and the kids were upstairs, and the house felt unusually still. It was as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath, waiting. The sound came from upstairs, from the same window that had been marked before. It was faint at first, just a whisper in the silence, but it grew louder, slowly, deliberately, like something testing the glass, scratching against it. My heart skipped a beat, and before I could stop myself, I found myself rushing up the stairs, my feet moving faster than my mind could process. The sound continued, growing louder with every step I took. When I reached the second-floor landing, I saw her standing there. Emma was frozen in front of the window, her hand pressed against the glass. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't speak, didn't even move when I entered the room. She was staring out into the desert, her gaze locked on something I couldn't see. "Emma?" I said, my voice trembling. "What's wrong?" She slowly turned to face me, her eyes filled with an emptiness that shook me to my core. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me, as if trying to decide whether or not she should speak. "Stephen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's out there. It's watching us." I followed her gaze out the window. The desert stretched out before us, bathed in the cold, fading light of the moon. The brush swayed in the wind, and nothing seemed out of place. Nothing but the unnerving stillness. The world felt suspended in time. "Emma, you're not making sense. What do you mean it's watching us?" But before she could answer, I felt it. An oppressive, suffocating presence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I stepped closer to the window, my eyes scanning the desert, trying to make sense of what she had said. And then I saw it. There, just on the horizon, was a shape. A dark figure moving slowly across the sand. It was massive, but its form was distorted, like it didn't quite belong to this world. It was barely a silhouette, but its shape was unmistakable. A towering, unnatural form that seemed to ripple and distort as it moved. My stomach churned as I watched it, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Is that what you saw?" I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away. Emma nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "It's not the first time. It's been coming closer every night. And each time the marks get deeper. I think it's getting ready to come inside." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything inside me went cold. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that something like that was out there, lurking in the desert, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But deep down, I knew it was true. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going away. "Stephen, we can't stay here anymore," Emma said, her voice breaking. "It's only a matter of time before it comes for us. We need to leave now." I didn't respond at first. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. But the truth was, there was no escaping this. The deceit had already claimed us, and it wasn't going to let us go. I had seen it with my own eyes. The marks on the windows, the strange shape in the distance. There was no running from this. "We can't leave, Emma," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. "Where would we go? It's already here, and running. Running won't stop it." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, I heard it again. The scraping, gnawing sound against the glass, louder this time. It wasn't just a sound now. It was a presence. I turned sharply to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The marks were back, deeper, more pronounced. The teeth were jagged, uneven, as though the thing on the other side had grown desperate, angry. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I reached for the glass, my hand trembling as I touched it. There was something wrong with the air too. Thick, heavy, as if the atmosphere itself was charged with something malignant. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, pushing the air from my lungs. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and it was all around us. "We need to leave," Emma insisted again, grabbing my arm. "Now." But it was too late. A loud thud shook the entire house, followed by another. The windows rattled in their frames, the sound so forceful I thought they might shatter. We both turned to face the door, instinctively stepping back. But nothing came in through the window. Nothing, except for the strange, unnatural shape I had seen earlier. Now closer, it was almost at the edge of the yard. I could see it clearly now, though no words could ever do justice to the shape I was seeing. It was as though it were too big for this world. A shadow that stretched and flickered unnaturally, as if the light itself was struggling to define it. I could feel its gaze now, heavy, oppressive, locking onto us through the glass. I knew at that moment that whatever it was, it wasn't going to stop, not until it had what it wanted. And no matter how far we ran, no matter how hard we tried to escape, we were already marked, just like the windows, just like the desert itself. The desert wasn't just a place. It was a hunger, and now it was coming for us. Story 4. Starving Creatures. I never thought I'd wake up. There were days when I could still feel it, an endless weight pressing against my chest, an unbearable silence. But I had stopped dreaming long ago. The comas, they tell you, are nothing more than black holes in time. A blur, a fading of life until nothing but darkness remains. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't expecting the reality that awaited me. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of glass breaking and the sharp sting of a needle in my arm. I had been in the middle of something. A car accident, I think. It was a mess, a complete wreck. I don't remember much of it. Just the feeling of weightlessness and the steady hum of an ambulance as I was carted off to the hospital. I didn't even know how long I had been out. Days, weeks, months. I couldn't tell. Time had slipped by me like water through fingers. And all I had left was the sick, sticky taste of hospital air that filled my lungs as I tried to lift myself from the bed. My head was heavy, and the world around me seemed distant and unreal. It felt like I was underwater, everything muffled, slow, sluggish. My body didn't quite obey me, and as I shifted, a strange dizziness gripped me. Still, I tried to push through, forcing my legs over the side of the bed. I winced as my bare feet hit the cold floor. Every inch of me felt alien, out of sync, disconnected. I stared at my hands, trembling slightly, as I placed them on my knees. They were pale, too pale, almost ghostly in the dim light of the hospital room. A sterile white light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the empty space. "Where was everyone?" I called out, my voice weak and raspy. "Hello?" No response. The silence seemed to suffocate me, pressing in from all sides. The soft beeping of a nearby heart monitor was the only sound, but even that seemed distant, like it was coming from another world. I forced myself to my feet, the room spinning slightly as I took a few unsteady steps forward. It was then that I noticed the faint smell. A metallic, sickly smell that lingered in the air, sharp like blood. The hallway outside the room was empty too. No nurses, no doctors, no patients. It was a ghost town. I stumbled out into the corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. I called out again, this time louder. "Is anyone here?" Nothing. The hospital seemed abandoned. A cold, unsettling feeling crept over me. This wasn't right. I hadn't been in a coma for that long. Had something happened? Was this some kind of strange nightmare? I couldn't shake the sense that something was very wrong. The hospital, once a place of care and warmth, now felt empty, dead. As I continued down the hallway, my eyes scanned the open doors to the various rooms, each one seemingly untouched. The pale, lifeless bodies of patients and staff lay sprawled on the floor. Their eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Bloodstains pooled beneath them, staining the tiles in dark crimson. I froze in place, unable to process what I was seeing. My stomach churned, and I felt the urge to gag. But there was no time to think about it. I staggered forward, unable to focus on the bodies, my mind already racing with questions. What happened here? Why was I the only one left alive? And where the hell was everyone else? The hospital was dead. The once bustling corridors now deserted, as if the entire building had been evacuated in a hurry. I reached the end of the hallway, where the nurse's station was supposed to be. Empty, abandoned. But then, I saw something that stopped me, dead in my tracks. On the floor, beside the desk, a blood-stained phone. It was the same model I had seen lying in the hands of the nurses earlier, one of those new touchscreen phones that were impossible to break. The screen was cracked, and the glass shimmered ominously in the pale light. I bent down to pick it up, careful not to touch the blood. But as I touched the screen, something strange happened. The screen flickered, a static buzz filling the air for a moment before a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. Find me, please. I dropped the phone in horror, the metallic clatter of it hitting the floor echoing in the silence. A wave of dizziness swept over me, and I staggered back, clutching the edge of the nurse's station for support. What the hell was happening? Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed through the building, deep and haunting. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the silence. There was something else. Something far more sinister, lurking just beneath it. The air was thick with a kind of tension I couldn't describe, as though something was waiting to strike. I rushed to the window, desperate to see anything, any sign of life, but when I pulled the blinds back, my blood ran cold. The city outside was a wasteland. The streets were littered with overturned cars, abandoned vehicles with their doors wide open. Buildings stood silent and empty, windows shattered. The once thriving city was now just a shell of what it had been. And then I saw it. In the distance, a group of people moved across the street, but something was wrong. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, staggering like they were hunting. Their faces were twisted, contorted in grotesque grimaces, and their eyes glowed with a hunger I could feel from here. They were looking for something. No, someone. My blood froze. These people weren't normal. They weren't survivors. They were predators. I backed away from the window, my heart racing in my chest. I stumbled toward the door, my breath coming in quick gasps. But the growl came again, closer this time. There was no time. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't know what had happened to the world outside. I didn't know what kind of nightmare I had woken up into. But one thing was for sure. The hospital wasn't safe, and neither was the city. Not anymore. As I ran through the corridors, I passed more bodies, more lifeless faces, more pools of blood. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't think. The sound of shuffling feet grew closer, and the growl became a snarl. I turned a corner, and there they were, figures moving out of the darkness like shadows. Their skin was pale, almost sickly. Their clothes, tattered and torn. They stopped as soon as they saw me, their eyes locking onto mine with a hunger I knew all too well. A scream tore through my throat, but I was already moving, running faster than I had ever run in my life. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not until I found out what had happened to this world. And maybe, just maybe, found a way to survive. I don't know how long I ran. Time, it seemed, had lost its grip on reality. What had once been clear, minutes, hours, was now an abstract concept, a lingering afterthought. The only thing that felt real was the pounding of my heart, the ache in my chest, and the bitter taste of fear clawing at the back of my throat. I found myself outside the hospital eventually, though I didn't remember crossing the threshold. It was as if the door opened by itself, and I was shoved into a nightmare that never ended. The streets were eerily quiet, but the absence of noise was somehow more unsettling than any sound could have been. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The city, my city, was unrecognizable, The familiar landmarks I once passed every day. The cafe on the corner, the grocery store where I'd buy my morning coffee, were gone. Only rubble and twisted metal remained. Cars lay abandoned in the middle of the streets, some flipped over, others with broken windows, as though some great and terrible force had come through, tearing everything apart in its wake. A heavy fog hung low in the air, thick and oppressive, making it difficult to see beyond a few feet. It curled around the abandoned vehicles like tendrils, as though trying to pull me into the very earth itself. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the smell. The scent of decay was everywhere, sharp, pungent, like something had died and was left to rot in the sun. The kind of smell you can taste in the back of your throat. I gagged, my stomach flipping, as I stumbled past the wreckage of what had once been a thriving city. What was once a community of bustling people now felt like an empty tomb, deserted and forgotten by time. I needed answers. I had to know what had happened to the world. The more I walked, the more I realized that there was no sign of life, no human figures, no animals, nothing but the broken remnants of a forgotten past. It was as if the entire city had been abandoned in the blink of an eye. I stepped over a shattered window pane, my feet crunching against the glass. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed forward, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. Where were the people? What happened to everyone? And more importantly, why was I the only one left? As I walked, I passed more signs of the chaos that had unfolded here. Bloodstains on the pavement, doors ripped off their hinges, windows shattered as though someone had desperately tried to escape. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps and the occasional low growl in the distance. I had heard it earlier, back at the hospital, that same guttural, hungry sound. It wasn't just the wind or some animal out in the distance. It was the unmistakable sound of something alive. And whatever it wasn't friendly. The air grew colder as I made my way deeper into the city, my breath now visible in the air, a thin fog escaping my mouth with every exhale. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, every instinct in me screaming to turn back, but I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I rounded a corner and froze. There, standing in the middle of the street, was a figure. Its back was turned to me, its body hunched over like something twisted and broken. The figure was ragged, its clothes torn and blood-stained, the smell of decay stronger than ever. My pulse quickened. It didn't move, didn't react to the sound of my footsteps. I was sure I had been seen, but still it stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for something. I inched forward, my legs trembling beneath me. What was it? A survivor? A victim? Or something else? And then it turned. The thing that faced me wasn't human. Its face was gaunt, its skin pale and stretched tight over its skull, eyes wide and wild with an unnatural hunger. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing sharp yellow teeth stained with blood. But what struck me the most were its eyes. Dead eyes, soulless eyes that seemed to peer into me as if it was seeing something beyond my physical form. It opened its mouth, the growl escaping from deep within its throat. But it wasn't a growl of pain or frustration. It was a growl of hunger. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound of the thing's footsteps, heavy and relentless, echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare slow down. The growl grew louder, closer. I could hear it, feel it in my bones as it pursued me through the streets. I ran, weaving in and out of the wreckage, dodging fallen signs and cars that blocked my path. But it was no use. It was faster than I was, closing the distance with every step. The streets were a maze, a labyrinth of destruction, and I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. And then, just as I thought it was over, I turned another corner and saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. More of them. The street was lined with at least half a dozen of these creatures, standing motionless in the fog, their faces twisted and eyes dead. They were all staring at me, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were waiting for me. I backed up slowly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was trapped. I could hear their low, guttural growls, the sound of their teeth clicking together as they took slow, deliberate steps toward me. There was no escape. My mind raced, thoughts swirling like a hurricane. I had to survive. I had to fight back. But how? I was alone. I had nothing. I could hear them getting closer. Their footsteps like a drumbeat, getting louder with each passing second. But then, from somewhere deep within me, something snapped. Fight. Fight to survive. I turned and bolted again, running for my life, but this time with more purpose. I wasn't just running to escape anymore. I was running to live. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. The sound of pursuit was right behind me, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, a roar, and the ground beneath me shook. I didn't stop to look back, didn't dare glance over my shoulder. I just kept running until my legs burned and my heart threatened to give out. I didn't know what had happened to the world. I didn't know what these things were, or why I was the only one left. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let them catch me. Not yet. I didn't have the answers I needed. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't survive out here alone. Not with them hunting me. I needed to find other survivors. Somewhere, someone had to be out there. Someone who knew what had happened. Someone who could help me survive. But first, I had to survive the night. I had run for what felt like hours. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body trembling with exhaustion. But there was no time to stop. The city, no, this nightmare, had become a prison. The fog seemed to close in around me, thick and suffocating, pulling at my skin like 1,000 unseen hands. My thoughts were scattered, frantic. I was no longer sure what was real and what was the product of my fear. But I knew this. I had to keep moving. The streets were unfamiliar now, distorted by my panic. Buildings loomed overhead like the hollowed-out shells of once thriving structures, their shattered windows gaping like mouths frozen in a scream. I could barely make out the shapes in the fog, but I knew they were there. Those things, those monsters. I don't even know when they started following me. It wasn't just one or two anymore. There were dozens, maybe more. Their footsteps were faint at first, like whispers behind me. But as the minutes stretched into hours, they became louder, closer. The growls were constant, low, reverberating in my bones, gnawing at my mind. I could feel their hunger, their need to chase me, to catch me, to end me. My legs were starting to fail me, my feet pounding the broken pavement with less and less force. But there was no rest. There was no escape. I turned a corner and nearly ran into a pile of debris. A building collapsed, leaving nothing but twisted metal and shattered glass. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped, wedged between walls of concrete and steel. My heart pounded as I backed up, eyes scanning the space, trying to find a way out. And then I saw it. A narrow alleyway between two buildings, barely wide enough to slip through. I didn't hesitate. I darted toward it, desperate, my body aching with every movement. But I had no choice. This was it. This was the only chance. I squeezed through the gap, my skin scraping against the rough surface of the brick. The alley was dark, but I could hear the scuffling of the creatures behind me, their growls growing more frenzied as they realized I had disappeared into the shadows. I had to find something, anything, that could help me. The alley twisted and turned like a labyrinth, the walls pressing in tighter with every step. The smell was unbearable, like something rotting, festering in the dark. It was so thick, so oppressive, it nearly made me gag. I felt like I was breathing in death itself. And then, a sound stopped me cold. A voice. It was low, gravelly, distorted. It came from the shadows ahead, and for a moment, I thought I imagined it. "I can help you." I froze, my heart leaping in my chest. Who was that? I strained my eyes, trying to see through the fog of the alley. There was nothing at first, but then there was movement. A figure stepped out of the shadows. I couldn't make out any clear details. Just the silhouette of someone, hunched over, covered in layers of dirt and grime. But what struck me immediately were the eyes. Bright, alive, not like the others. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from the running and fear. I wanted to move, to get away, but my legs were like lead, frozen in place. The figure took a step forward, the sound of its boots scraping against the dirt like the rasp of a dying breath. I know what happened. My mind was racing. What was happening? How did this person know? Could they help me? Or were they just another threat? I started to say, but the figure raised a hand, silencing me. They were close now, close enough for me to see the details of their face. Ragged, haggard, but unmistakably human. "You've been asleep a long time," the figure said, their voice soft but firm, like they were trying to comfort me or warn me. "Longer than you think. You're not the first to wake up like this, but you might be the last." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? The city's gone. Everyone's gone. The ones who made it. They're not who they used to be. You've seen them. The infected." My mind spun, trying to process what they were saying. The infected? I thought back to the creatures I had seen earlier, the way they moved with such hunger, such desperation. That's what they were? They had once been human. The thought sent a chill crawling up my spine. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why am I still alive?" The figure paused, their eyes narrowing as though they were weighing something in their mind. "Maybe you're immune, or maybe you're just lucky. Either way, you're not safe here. Not anymore." I swallowed, my throat dry. What happened? I could barely bring myself to ask. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I didn't want to know, but I had to. I needed to know. The figure exhaled slowly, their shoulders sagging, as if the weight of what they were about to say was too much to bear. "It started with the virus. People started getting sick, just like that. They snapped their fingers. They didn't know what it was, but they didn't stop it in time. Then it got worse. It turned them into things. Hungry, savage. They killed each other. And those who didn't die, they're out there now, hunting. My heart slammed against my ribs as I absorbed the truth. A virus, the thought of it spread faster than my panic. A virus that could turn people into monsters? We're running out of time, the figure continued, their eyes locking onto mine. They're coming. They won't stop, and we can't fight them off. But there's a way out. There's a place, a shelter, far from here. You have to come with me. The thought of leaving this city, of running even farther away, was terrifying. But I didn't have a choice. I could see the desperation in the figure's eyes, the same panic that gripped me. And yet, something about them felt different. Calm. They had survived this long. Maybe they had the answers I was looking for. I'll go with you, I said, my voice more steady than I expected. It was as if the decision had been made for me. But as I took a step forward, I heard it again. That guttural growl closed this time. My body tensed, the figure's face twisted with a sudden intense urgency. We need to go. But it was too late. The creatures had found us. I turned, my pulse racing, as I saw them emerging from the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. The alley was now a trap, and we were cornered. The figure pulled something from their jacket. A knife, a weapon of some sort. But I could see the fear in their eyes. They weren't going to be enough. I had no choice. I turned and ran again. My body screamed in protest, but I kept moving, the adrenaline pushing me forward. I didn't know where I was going anymore. All I knew was that I had to survive. I had to find a way out. The night had swallowed us whole. I had no idea where we were anymore. The world outside had become an impenetrable blur of fog, shadows, and fragments of memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. My body ached. Each breath labored as I tried to focus on the narrow path ahead. I was still running, or at least I thought I was. The streets had warped into a twisted version of the city I once knew. But now it seemed like something far worse, something foreign, even in the dark. The figure beside me had been silent for what felt like hours, and every so often I would glance over, searching for a sign, any sign, that I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. But they were distant, eyes focused forward, their expression unreadable. It wasn't that they seemed unafraid. No, it was the kind of fear that was wrapped in resignation. The kind you only feel when you've lived through things you can never forget. I wanted to ask them so many things. What happened next? What we were running from? Why everything felt like it was on the edge of collapse? But I couldn't find the words. I couldn't focus. I just ran. We both did. The sound of footsteps, their footsteps, echoed in the distance. At first, I thought it was just the pounding of my heart in my ears. But as the minutes stretched on, I knew it was something far worse. The growls were back, low and primal, reverberating through the fog. The things were still hunting us, and the thought made the pit in my stomach twist with dread. They're getting closer, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My legs felt like they were turning to jelly, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to. The figure beside me didn't answer. Their pace quickened, and I had no choice but to follow. They knew the city better than I did, knew the path we had to take. And if I was going to survive, I needed them. But part of me resented them too. I didn't want to be dependent on anyone, not after everything that had happened. I glanced around. The streets were eerily silent, save for the distant snarls. Buildings loomed overhead like skeletal remains, their walls scarred with remnants of violence. Broken windows, spray-painted warnings, and a sense of despair that clung to everything like a thick fog. We passed a store that had long since been looted, the shelves bare, the windows smashed. There was nothing left in this place except the monsters. I thought back to the time before all this, the days when I had taken everything for granted. The rush of morning traffic, the mundane routine of work, the laughter of friends I hadn't seen in years. It all seemed so trivial now, so far removed from the horrific reality I was trapped in. We rounded another corner, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the street, their back turned to us, just like the others I had seen. It was a person, or at least it used to be. They were hunched over, moving in an erratic, unnatural rhythm. Their clothes were torn, their skin ashen and thin. But what caught my attention wasn't the person itself. It was the way they moved, shuffling, their head jerking in an unnatural manner, like they were searching for something. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the familiar knot of terror tightening in my chest. It wasn't just one of them. It was many. "We need to hide," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. But the figure beside me didn't flinch. They kept moving forward, as though they were immune to the danger. I wanted to scream, to shout for them to stop, but I didn't have the strength. The fear in my body was paralyzing. I was at the edge of exhaustion, and yet I couldn't stop running. My body wasn't my own anymore. It was just a vessel, a machine moving without purpose, driven by a fear deeper than anything I had ever known. I followed because I had no choice. As we drew closer to the figure, the air around us seemed to grow colder, the fog thickening, choking the space between us. The growls were louder now, and they weren't coming from the creatures anymore. No, they were coming from within, the sound of something stirring inside me, urging me to run, to escape. I could see the figure's face now, twisted with pain, their lips drawn back in a grotesque snarl. Their eyes, those dead, unblinking eyes, fixed on us. They knew we were there. And then they spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was low and rough, rasping like dry leaves scratching against stone. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it sent a chill straight down my spine. I froze, caught between the instinct to run and the overwhelming need to understand. The figure took a step toward us, its feet dragging against the pavement with a sickening scrape. Every movement was unnervingly slow, deliberate. But then, something unexpected happened. The figure stopped. The creature's eyes narrowed, its head tilted slightly to the side. A growl, soft, almost curious, rumbled deep in its throat. The creature was sniffing the air. It was sniffing us. And I realized, with a shock, that it wasn't just hunting us. It was searching for something else. You're not like them," it muttered, as if it had suddenly recognized something. The figure's words sent a jolt of confusion through me. Not like them? Was I different? Was I immune? The air grew heavier, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. only to have it snatched away just as quickly. Without warning, the figure lunged. It was faster than I could react. One moment, it was standing there, eerily still. The next, it was charging toward us, its arms reaching out, its mouth open, revealing teeth sharp enough to tear flesh from bone. I barely had time to scream before the figure was upon me. But the figure beside me acted fast. They grabbed me, pulling me roughly to the side, yanking me behind a stack of debris, just as the creature slammed into the ground where I had just been standing. The sound of its body hitting the pavement echoed in the silence, a sickening thud that made me gag. I pressed myself against the cold, damp brick of the building, trying to steady my breathing. The world around me spun, but I could still hear it, the scraping, the growling, the relentless sound of the creatures moving through the fog. They were everywhere, and we were running out of time. The figure who had been guiding me didn't look back at the creature. They didn't even flinch. They were moving again, already pushing forward with a sense of urgency that sent a wave of panic through me. "Come on," they hissed, pulling me along. "We're almost there." But as we continued to run, the question gnawed at me. A question that I had to ask. What happens when the last of us are gone? "Who are they?" I gasped. "What are they?" The figure didn't answer right away. We turned another corner, the city stretching out in front of us, dark and empty. Their voice was low when they finally spoke. "I don't know, but they're the end of everything, and they won't stop until there's no one left to hunt." It felt like the world was collapsing around us, but somehow I knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever had happened to the world, to humanity, it wasn't over. It was only getting worse. And as we ran, I realized that this was the truth I had to face. I didn't know if I would survive, or if I even wanted to anymore. But the one thing I did know was this. If I was going to survive, I would have to fight. Not just the creatures that stalked the streets, but the terror that had already taken root in my soul. The shelter wasn't what I imagined. When I had agreed to follow the figure through the streets of this twisted city, I had hoped for something. A refuge, a safe haven, something that might hold the answers to all the questions spinning in my mind. What had happened to the world? Where were the others? Why was I spared? But the closer we got to this place, the more the dread in my chest grew. The shadowed alleyways we had passed earlier seemed innocent in comparison to this. There was something wrong about it. Something in the air that made my skin crawl and my heart race. The building loomed before me, a decaying structure that looked as though it had been abandoned for years. Its windows were boarded up, and the door was barricaded with a mixture of wood and rusted metal. It didn't look like a sanctuary. It looked like a tomb, a place where people came to die. And yet, the figure beside me walked toward it without hesitation. "We're almost there," they muttered, their voice steady, but there was something hollow in it, something forced. It was as if they were trying to convince themselves as much as me. I didn't argue. What choice did I have? I had been running for hours, my legs barely holding me up, the constant growls and snarls echoing in the distance. The creatures were still hunting us. There was no time to question anything anymore. I had to trust the figure, or at least, I had no choice but to follow. They pushed the door open with a loud creak, the sound sending a chill down my spine. Inside, it was darker than I expected. The only light came from a flickering lamp in the corner, casting strange shadows across the room. I couldn't make out the details at first. Just a sense of cold, damp air and the scent of something metallic, something old, something that hadn't seen the sun in far too long. I stepped inside, my footfalls muffled by the dust and debris that covered the floor. The figure led me down a narrow hallway, their movements swift and purposeful, as though they knew this place like the back of their hand. But the silence was unnerving. There was no one here. No other survivors. No other souls. Just the two of us, moving through this forgotten place, each step taking us deeper into a hole that felt like it would swallow us whole. We reached the end of the hallway, and the figure stopped in front of a door. They didn't knock, didn't hesitate. They simply opened it, revealing a room that looked no different from the rest of the building. Cold, empty, and decaying. The only thing that caught my attention was the table in the center of the room. On it, there were papers scattered haphazardly, along with old cracked photographs. But it wasn't the papers that drew me in. It was the strange symbols scrawled across the walls. I took a step forward, my heart thudding in my chest as I examined the markings. They were not like anything I had seen before. Distorted, jagged shapes that twisted and turned in on themselves, like something born of a fever dream. The more I looked at them, the more I felt a strange pull. It was as if they were calling to me, beckoning me to understand. The figure moved beside me, their breath shallow. "This is where it all began," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. I turned to them, confusion swirling in my mind. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happened here?" But before they could answer, a sound, faint but unmistakable, pierced the silence. A knock, soft, deliberate. I froze, my pulse quickening. The figure beside me didn't move. They didn't even flinch. But I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The knock came again, this time louder, more urgent. "Don't open it," the figure muttered, their eyes wide, their face pale. Story 5. I was turned into a hunter. I don't know how long I had been unconscious. Days, weeks. The only thing that pierced the haze of my mind was the faint, oppressive scent of antiseptic and something more metallic, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I tried to move, but the dull ache that spread across my body told me to stay still. Something wasn't right. The last thing I remembered was a car crash, the kind that makes you feel like your body is splintering in 1,000 ways. The blinding lights, the shrill sound of sirens, then nothing. Just an abyss that I couldn't claw my way out of. Now I was here, wherever here was. My eyelids fluttered open slowly, my vision blurry at first. I heard the steady beeping of a heart monitor somewhere beside me. But that didn't comfort me. There was a coldness to the air too, far too cold for comfort. It didn't smell like a room I'd been in before. The sterile scent lingered, but there was something off, something wrong. I tried to lift my arm, but it felt heavy, like something was attached. I blinked, slowly focusing, and the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar weight on my side. It wasn't the usual ache from a wound or the usual surgical after effects. No, this felt different. I gingerly reached over with my left hand, fingers brushing against the smooth, unnatural surface. It was cold, smooth, too smooth, and it was alive. I could feel something pulsing beneath the surface. My breath caught in my throat, and I yanked my hand away as if the thing had burned me. My heart raced. What the hell? The moment the panic set in, I felt it. An overwhelming, gnawing hunger. It wasn't like hunger from the stomach. It was deep in my veins, something primal, something unnatural. I turned my head to look at the rest of the room. I was in a hospital bed, yes, but it didn't feel like the standard ICU. The lights were too dim, the walls too silent. It was... I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't abandoned, but it felt like it was. Like no one cared enough to check on me. I pulled the sheets off, trying to inspect the damage. My body was bruised, taped up, and wrapped in a few places, but it was the right side of my torso that drew my attention. There, under the blanket, was the hideous graft. It wasn't human. There was a horn. That's the only word I could think of at the moment. A thick, glossy growth protruded from my side, and it throbbed like a second heartbeat. Blood red, slick with something not quite right. I could feel it too. It was alive. It was impossible. The kind of thing that no surgeon would be able to explain. Or at least shouldn't have been able to explain. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to scream. I needed answers, but the questions kept spiraling in my head, each one more terrifying than the last. I reached for the side of the bed, pushing myself up with shaky arms, trying to get a better look. And then I heard it. The whisper. It was faint at first, so quiet that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But no. There it was again. Soft, insistent. I could feel my fingers tremble as they gripped the bed, trying to keep steady. I glanced around, trying to locate the source of the voice. No one was in the room, but the voice. It was in my head. It wasn't a voice like my own thoughts, not like a memory I was replaying. This was something else, something sinister. It spoke again, a low murmur that dripped with malice. Hunt, hunt, hunger. I froze. The words echoed through my skull, making my skin crawl. My throat was tight, and I found myself clenching my fists at the sudden urge to obey. I had to get up. I had to move. The voice was commanding me now, pushing me forward. The bloodlust, the hunger. I could feel it growing inside of me. It was like a switch had been flipped. Every fiber of my being screamed for something. It wasn't food. It wasn't water. It was something deeper. Something darker. Hunt. The voice urged again, louder this time, and I found myself moving. I didn't know why. I didn't even want to, but I had no control. I was a passenger in my own body, watching helplessly as my feet carried me across the cold tile floor. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet making a soft padding sound against the floor. The building was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that gnawed at the edges of your sanity. No nurses, no doctors, no patients. It was like the place had been abandoned, yet I could still feel the cold eyes of invisible watchers on me. My breath quickened. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. The silence pressed in on me, the hunger gnawing at my insides like a living thing. The door to the elevator slid open with a soft ding. I stepped inside, the strange thing on my side pulsing again. A wave of dizziness washed over me, but I shook it off and pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator descended, my mind raced. What had happened to me? What had they done to me? The voice whispered again, blood. I recoiled, my eyes darting around the empty elevator. My reflection stared back at me in the polished silver doors, but it wasn't just me. Behind me, an image flickered in the glass. A figure, tall, shadowed, barely visible. It wasn't there, but it was. The reflection moved with an unnatural grace, like a predator circling its prey. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the floor, my body no longer my own. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened with a soft hiss. I didn't hesitate. My legs carried me forward, out into the hallway. The lobby was just as empty as the rest of the building. It was dead silent, too quiet for comfort. But there was something more. A faint, pungent scent in the air. Blood, thick, metallic. It was everywhere. I followed it. The hallway stretched on endlessly, the scent growing stronger, the hunger becoming unbearable. I passed darkened rooms and cracked doors, all of them wide open. And then, in the distance, I saw it, a figure, a man, stumbling, disoriented, covered in blood. No, I felt my body move before I could stop it. Hunt, the hunger was no longer just an urge, it was a driving force pushing me forward. I reached for him before I even knew what I was doing. My hand latched onto his shoulder, pulling him back with unnatural strength. His eyes widened in terror. He tried to scream, but it was cut short when I saw what was on his neck. A deep gash, fresh and bleeding. A glimmer of light flashed in my mind. A realization. The voice, the hunger, the pull. It wasn't just hunting. It was feeding. I was feeding. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want any of this. But my body, my soul, they were screaming for it. I leaned in and I fed. The hunger didn't stop. I tried to resist it, but there was no controlling it anymore. It was in my veins, crawling beneath my skin, gnawing at me from the inside out. The man I had pulled into the darkness of the hallway, a stranger whose name I would never know, lay crumpled in a heap at my feet. Blood pooled around him, his body already cold. I had drained him dry, and still the hunger roared within me. I stumbled backward, feeling the walls close in, my vision blurring. I wanted to stop, to get away, but my body was no longer my own. The thing inside me, the horned, pulsating graft, was driving me forward, compelling me to seek more, to feed again. I knew I was losing myself. The thought clawed at the back of my mind, but it was faint. It was overwhelmed by the relentless, primal drive that had taken over my instincts. My mind screamed in protest, but my legs moved and my feet hit the cold tile floor with mechanical precision. There was no one else in the lobby, no signs of life, only the echoes of my own footsteps ringing through the emptiness, but I could feel it. Somewhere, just beyond the reach of my awareness, there was another pulse, another scent, blood. I followed the trail as if it was my destiny, as if I had no choice. Every step I took was a step deeper into the abyss. And the closer I got to the source of the blood, the more I felt like I was being drawn in by something far older, far darker than anything I could comprehend. The hallway twisted before me, the lights flickering overhead as I made my way down the sterile white corridors. There was a shadow at the end of the hallway, something that moved in the periphery of my vision, shifting and slithering like a whisper. I didn't understand it. I couldn't understand it, but I felt it. The voice, the command, hunt. I turned the corner, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. The world outside seemed to fade, narrowing down to the single point of focus that had taken root in my mind. Blood. A door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see a dim light flickering. I approached it slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my chest, as the scent of blood grew stronger. The room beyond the door was dark, but I could make out shapes, shadows, moving within. I pushed the door open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, there were bodies. Not just one or two. There were more. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They lay sprawled across the floor, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Some of them were still twitching, their eyes open but lifeless. Others had already passed, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. And there, standing in the center of it all, was the thing I had been searching for. A man, or what had once been a man. His skin was ashen, stretched tight across his bones, and his eyes were wide and hollow. He held a bloodied knife in his hand, and there were stains on his clothes. But it wasn't the knife that caught my attention. It was the way his mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, one that never seemed to end. "You've come," he said, his voice soft but filled with a strange authority. "I've been waiting for you." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I was transfixed by the sight of him, as if his very presence had hypnotized me. The hunger inside me stirred, a low growl echoing in my chest. It was feeding time again. The man stepped forward, his movements jerky and unnatural. There was something about him, something that made my skin crawl. But even as I recognized the danger, I couldn't stop myself from stepping closer. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice hoarse from disuse. The hunger clawed at my throat, making it hard to think, hard to speak. The man's grin widened. "I am what you will become." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my chest. I didn't understand what he was saying, couldn't comprehend the meaning of his words. But something deep inside me knew. I was already becoming something else. Something monstrous, something that fed on blood and lived in the shadows. Something that would never be satisfied. "You're just beginning to understand," the man continued, his voice soft, almost like a lullaby. "You feel the hunger, don't you? The need to feed, the need to hunt. It's a part of you now. It's in your blood." He raised the knife in his hand, the blade catching the dim light of the room. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack, but instead, he pressed it gently against his own neck. "You'll soon learn, just like I did," he whispered. "The hunger doesn't stop. It never goes away. You can feed until your stomach is full, until the blood runs dry, but there will always be more. Always another victim, another person to hunt." I wanted to run. I wanted to escape, but the hunger surged, rising up inside of me like a tidal wave. It consumed me. It controlled me. And before I knew it, I had stepped forward, my hand gripping the man's wrist, forcing the knife away from his throat. He didn't fight back. He just smiled. "Go on. Feed. It's what you were made for." I could feel it. The power of the hunger, the rush of it filling me, overtaking every thought, every ounce of resistance. I raised the knife, my hand trembling as I brought it down toward the man's exposed neck. But something inside me faltered. A flicker of doubt. I hesitated. And in that moment, the man lunged at me, his hands wrapping around my throat in a vice-like grip. His eyes were wild, with the same hunger that burned inside of me. "You think you're in control?" he hissed. "You think you can fight it? You're mine now. You belong to the hunger." I struggled, my hands clawing at his, but it was no use. His grip was too strong. The room spun around me, my vision fading. The world turned dark, the hunger screaming in my mind. And then, just as I thought I was about to lose consciousness, I heard a voice that was not my own. Hunt. Hunt. It wasn't just a command anymore. It was a plea. And I understood. The hunger would never stop. Not until I gave in completely. Until I became the monster. And that was when I realized the truth. I wasn't just a victim. I was chosen. Chosen by the hunger. Chosen to hunt. Chosen to become something far worse than a monster. The hunger was no longer a whisper. It had become a roar, an all-consuming force that battered against the walls of my mind. I couldn't remember the last time I felt full. My body, my senses, they were warped, twisted by something that wasn't just physical, but something darker. Something that ran deeper than the blood coursing through my veins. I had become an instrument of it, an unwilling vessel. It was hard to think, hard to remember anything before. The man in the room, the one who had shown me what I could become. His words echoed in my skull like a chant, like a curse that I couldn't escape. You will never stop. You will always hunger. The room was spinning. I hadn't eaten anything, at least nothing that felt like food. It had all been blood. The blood of the people I'd found. Strangers, the desperate, the lost. Each time, it was the same. I'd approach, I'd hunt, and I'd feed until the gnawing, soul-crushing hunger quieted, just long enough for me to feel human again. But even now, that hunger was stirring, relentless and sharp. I stood in the alley, hidden in the shadows of the city. The concrete slick with rain, the wetness, a cool contrast to the heat inside of me. The night felt heavy, thick with the pulse of life around me. Strangers walking home, laughter spilling out of bars. The hum of the city that had always felt like a comfort to me. But now, it felt foreign, hostile. I didn't belong here anymore. My fingers dug into the concrete, the edges of the old buildings pressing in on me, as if the world itself was trying to crush me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear my skin off and leave the beast that I had become behind. But every breath reminded me of the truth. I was a monster, and the hunger never stopped. I had to feed again. But it wasn't just about the blood anymore. I could feel something changing. Every time I fed, I became more like the thing that had spoken to me. The thing that had taken root in my chest, in my soul. I could feel its presence in the back of my mind, like a dark stain spreading across my thoughts, distorting them. I couldn't trust myself. I turned, my footsteps slow and deliberate, as I began walking into the heart of the city. The world was sharp around me, every detail heightened. I could hear every footstep, every whispered conversation, every heartbeat that pulsed like a steady drumbeat in the night. It was like I was drowning in the sounds, but at the same time, they were a lifeline. They were a call. I could smell them. The people. I was hungry, my eyes fixed on a figure across the street. A woman alone, her movements sluggish as she stumbled out of a bar, clearly intoxicated. She didn't notice me watching, didn't feel the shift in the air, but I did. I felt her. I could taste her blood already, feel it coursing through her veins like a sweet, forbidden nectar. I could hear the pulse of it, feel the warmth of her body, and I knew this was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped forward, the street lights above flickering as I moved into the shadows. I wasn't sure if I was still myself anymore. It felt like I had lost pieces of who I was with every step I took. The human part of me, the man who had been before the crash, before the craft, was fading, slowly, quietly. I could see her more clearly now, just a few steps away. She had turned to look at her phone, unaware of me, as I closed the gap between us. Her scent, the rush of her blood, it was intoxicating. And then, I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, startled. But there was no one there. The street was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, my eyes darting around, but I saw nothing. The hunger pulsed inside me, almost mocking my fear, but I couldn't control it. I couldn't trust myself. And then, the voice came again. Not in my mind, but from the shadows. Don't do it. I froze. It was him. The man from the hospital. The one who had warned me about the hunger. The one who had shown me what I would become. His silhouette emerged from the dark. His face hidden in shadow. His voice an eerie, calm presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "You're becoming just like me," he said, stepping closer, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You think you can fight it, but you can't. The hunger takes everything." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I felt the shift, the undeniable truth that I had no control. My body was no longer my own. "You're a part of it now," the man continued, his voice gentle but filled with an undeniable finality. "You've crossed over to the opposite zone. There's no going back." I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a horrible, crawling realization. The monster that had taken root inside me, that had made me hunger for blood, wasn't just some twisted accident. It wasn't just a graft. It was something far more sinister, something ancient. The man took another step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're not just infected. You're chosen. This is your purpose now. You were never meant to be human. You were always meant to be a creature of the night." The woman, still standing a few feet away, continued scrolling through her phone, unaware of the horror unfolding just behind her. She was oblivious. She was prey, and I was the predator. The hunger surged again, this time overpowering my thoughts completely. The man's voice became a distant hum in my mind as I took a step toward her. Then another. I couldn't stop myself. I was moving closer, drawn by the pulsing, irresistible call of her blood. But then, something broke through. Something more than the hunger. A memory, a flicker of the man I used to be. The one who wasn't this monster. The man who had a family. The man who had dreams. I remembered my wife. I remembered my kids. I remembered everything I had lost. I stopped. The woman continued walking, unaware that she was seconds away from being torn apart. My hands clenched into fists, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fought to regain control. The man in the shadows laughed softly, but there was no warmth in it, only cold amusement. "You can fight it all you want. You're already lost." I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that I wasn't like him, that I was still human. But deep down, I knew the truth. The hunger was winning. I felt it in my bones. The transformation was complete. And in that moment, I realized that there was no going back. No matter how much I fought it, no matter how much I tried to hold on to who I used to be, it was slipping away, piece by piece. And the only thing left was the monster. It was not the blood that terrified me anymore. I could feel it, the pulse in my veins, the rush of it, as it beat against my skin. eager for release. The hunger was always there, an unrelenting shadow that clung to my every thought. But it wasn't the thirst that haunted me. No, it was the knowledge of what I had become, what I was capable of. The man in the shadows, the one who had once been like me, the one who had warned me, had been right. There was no going back, not now, not after what I had done, after what I had become. I stared down at my hands, the skin still warm from the blood I had spilled. The woman, the one I had almost taken in the alley, she was gone now. I hadn't fed, not yet, but I could still feel her presence lingering in the air, the scent of her fear, the way her pulse had quickened when she'd felt me draw near. It was a cruel joke, that hunger playing on my mind, teasing me with the idea of what could have been. But I couldn't do it. Not now, not after the man's words. He had shown me the truth. I was no longer human. I had crossed over to the opposite zone, a place where the lines between man and monster were blurred beyond recognition, a place where there was no redemption. The city around me buzzed with life, a million souls walking unaware of the creatures standing just beneath the surface. I could hear them, their heartbeats, their steps, the quiet hum of their lives, each of them a potential meal, each of them a vessel for my hunger. But I didn't want to hunt anymore. I didn't want to feed. The truth was, I was afraid. The fear wasn't of the hunger, not anymore. I had come to terms with that part of it. No, it was the fear of what I might do next. What I had already done. I could feel the darkness clawing at me, whispering in my mind, urging me to act, to feed, to embrace the monster within me. I could feel its influence growing stronger, like a virus, infecting every thought, every action. I had learned a few things since the night I first stepped into the shadows. 1. The hunger was insatiable. 2. There were others like me, lost souls who had been corrupted by the same force, the same darkness. The man in the alley had told me as much. But the third thing, the most terrifying lesson I had learned, was that once you gave in to the hunger, once you crossed the line, there was no going back. I wasn't sure what had happened to the others, the ones who had already fallen, the ones who had already embraced the monster, but I knew one thing for certain. They weren't human anymore. They were nothing but predators, driven by a singular, unyielding need. Blood. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. But it was no use. They lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I was already becoming like them. I felt it, my stomach twisted as I walked aimlessly through the streets, the familiar buildings around me starting to blur. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I was lost, drifting in a world that no longer felt real. The world had shifted, and I was caught somewhere in between what I had been and what I was becoming. I could still remember the taste of the woman's blood in the alley, the warmth of it as it slid down my throat. It had been satisfying. The hunger had subsided for a moment, just long enough for me to feel human again. But it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. The sky above was a dull gray wash, the clouds hanging low, pressing down on me like a weight. The streets were slick with rain, the sound of the water pooling in the gutters mixing with the noise of passing cars, and the occasional shout from a group of pedestrians. It was as if the world had moved on without me. I paused at a street corner, my eyes drifting over the crowd. They were so normal, so alive. They had no idea what lurked just beneath the surface. The shadow that followed me, the hunger that drove me. I stood there for what felt like hours, lost in the madness of it all. I wanted to scream, to shout at them, to tell them to run. But I didn't. Instead, I walked. I didn't know where I was going. My feet seemed to carry me of their own accord, my body moving without conscious thought. I was a puppet, strung along by the same force that had first pulled me into the darkness. I turned down an alley, the shadows swallowing me whole. And there, standing at the end of the alley, was the man. He was waiting for me. I recognized him immediately, though his face was gaunt now, the skin pulled tight over his bones, the eyes hollow and empty. The hunger had taken him completely, leaving behind only a shell. But there was something else in his expression, something that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. He was smiling, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was something darker. "You're here," he said, his voice cold and rasping. "I knew you would come." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. I felt like I was drowning, sinking into the depths of a nightmare that I couldn't escape. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't move. The hunger had me rooted in place, bound to him by some invisible thread. "You're becoming one of us," he continued, stepping closer. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the alley. "It's inevitable. There's no escape." I wanted to protest, to deny it, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry. The hunger twisted in my gut, a deep, gnawing ache that made it impossible to think of anything else. I needed to feed, but I didn't want to. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his grin widening. "The hunger is taking over. The monster is in you now. You'll never be the same. You'll never be human again." I tried to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't go. I could feel the hunger creeping up my spine, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I was already lost. "You know what you have to do," he said, his voice low and tempting. "You're already one of us. You've crossed the line. Now, it's time to embrace it." I felt my body move before I could stop it. My hands clenched into fists. My breath quickened. My pulse pounded in my ears. I was becoming like him, like them. I was becoming the monster. Story 6. The Path That Leads to Death. I never planned to drive down that road. It wasn't part of the route, but when the GPS rerouted me, I figured it was just another detour. I should have known better. Something about that road felt wrong the moment I took the exit. The sky had already begun to darken, and the dense forest on either side of the road created an oppressive atmosphere. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the car hummed quietly beneath me. A rhythm that should have been soothing, but only seemed to grow more unsettling with each passing mile. It was supposed to be a short trip, just a few hours to visit some relatives out of state. But the day had stretched on longer than expected. And now, as I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, I realized it was nearly midnight. The road had become more isolated with every turn, the occasional house fading away behind me. The headlights of my car pierced through the darkness, revealing little beyond the outlines of trees and the faint outlines of hills that looked like shadows themselves. I should have turned around, but I didn't. The thought crossed my mind. Sure, but I pressed forward, thinking it would be easier to keep going. The long, straight stretch of the road seemed to promise nothing but emptiness. The kind of nothingness that always feels like it's hiding something. Then I noticed the car behind me. At first, I thought it was just a figment of my tired mind, a trick of the eyes. But no, it was real. The headlights were a little too bright, a little too constant. I squinted in the rearview mirror, my heart starting to thud. The car was a good distance back, but the way it seemed to stick to my tail felt off. Almost like it was purposefully following me, matching my speed no matter what I did. I tried speeding up just a little. The engine roared as I pressed the accelerator, but the car behind me did the same. I wasn't imagining this. The car was following me. I thought about pulling over, but something told me not to. It was ridiculous, right? A part of me thought I could outrun it. But even as I told myself that, the other part of me was screaming at me to stop, to get out of there. The minutes passed in a slow, suffocating crawl. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, but the car remained there, following me at an even pace, never speeding up or slowing down. It was like it had become a part of the night itself, unmoving, but always present. That's when I saw it. A shadow darted across the road up ahead, a figure quickly disappearing into the woods. My heart skipped a beat. The road was empty. There shouldn't have been anyone walking out here in the middle of nowhere. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles going wide, as I strained my eyes to see anything ahead of me. But there was nothing. No sign of the figure. Nothing except the winding path stretching on for miles, cutting through the thick trees, like some kind of never-ending tunnel. I felt a shift in the air, a sudden stillness. The wind, which had been rustling the trees all night, stopped completely. My car seemed to slow, as if it was dragging through the air. And for a moment, I didn't know if it was my mind or the world itself pulling back. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The car was closer now, much closer, too close. The headlights, glaring like twin eyes, seemed to be drawing me in, as if the road was narrowing and I was being forced down it. Panic bubbled in my chest, rising up to choke me. I stepped harder on the gas, trying to put more distance between us. But it was as if the car was still right behind me. Even though I was accelerating, something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I whipped my head around to look out the side window, as if I might catch a glimpse of something, anything, that would reassure me. But the forest was still dark and silent, stretching endlessly on both sides. That's when I saw the car, right there in the corner of my eye, in the distance. It was there, but then it wasn't. It had vanished, and in its place was something far worse. The road ahead, now just a dark stretch of nothingness, was empty. No cars, no headlights, just me, alone. My breath hitched. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering in my chest, my foot locking against the pedal as I tried to make sense of the scene. The headlights were gone, and that car, was nowhere to be found. But the air felt thick with a presence. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The car was still there, almost too close now. A sudden burst of terror shot through me, and I whipped my head around, my eyes wide and frantic. There was no one there. No one in the rearview. No one on the road. I had to get out. I had to get off this road. I couldn't stay here. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, swerving off the paved road and into the dirt shoulder, my tires screeching against the gravel. The car skidded violently, but I regained control, the wheel shaking under my hands. And that's when I saw it. The figure. A man dressed in a dark coat, his face a blurry, indistinct smear of pale skin and hollow eyes, stepped out from the shadow of the trees. He wasn't just standing there. He was waiting for me, for the car, for something. I froze, my breath coming in shallow bursts. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. And then, the headlights of the car blinked, just once. The figure lifted his hand. I couldn't look away. The car that had been following me, stopped just a few feet in front of me. The man, now moving slowly toward my window. His face, twisted and unnervingly calm, was barely visible in the dark, but his presence was suffocating. The air seemed to grow colder. The man's mouth barely moved as he spoke, his words like a soft rasp in the silence of the night. "Get out of the car." I stared at him, my body frozen, my heart a loud, deafening thud in my chest. Something in his voice. It wasn't just a command. It was an invitation to something darker, something I didn't want to face. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. If I stayed in the car, I wasn't going to make it out of here. I reached for the door handle, but before I could even touch it, the man's hand shot out, slamming against the window. I gasped, my heart skipping a beat, my hand shaking on the handle. "Get out." His voice was more forceful now, colder. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that the night had only just begun. I've never been the type of person to get easily scared. I always chalked up strange feelings or uncanny situations to coincidence or simple paranoia. But as I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, I knew that this wasn't some trick of the mind. There was something out there, something real, something waiting for me. And whatever it was, I knew it wasn't good. I kept staring at the man, his face now illuminated by the dim glow of my headlights, his features sharp and grotesque. His eyes, pale, almost lifeless, never left mine. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, his hands still pressed against my window, as if daring me to open it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at him to go away, to leave me alone. But I couldn't find my voice. I was paralyzed. I thought about rolling up the window, locking the doors, driving off as fast as I could. But something held me in place. The terror had me by the throat, squeezing so tight I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to look away from him, glancing at the rearview mirror to see if I could somehow escape. But it was too late. The road was still empty. My car was alone on the shoulder. The only movement, the slight trembling of my hands on the steering wheel. The silence felt deafening. The kind of silence you only hear in the dead of night, when nothing else exists except for the beating of your heart. I slammed my foot on the gas, desperate to break free of the nightmare. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, the engine whining in protest. But no matter how fast I pushed the pedal, the man's figure remained fixed in my mind. His chilling gaze seared into my thoughts. I had barely made it a few feet before I felt a jolt. A sudden tug on the back of the car that sent my heart into overdrive. My tires spun on the loose gravel, throwing up clouds of dust and rocks as the car skidded to a stop. I quickly threw the car into reverse, my eyes frantically searching for a way out. But it was then that I realized the road was gone. The trees, once flanking either side, now seemed to close in on me, their dark trunks leaning like the hands of some unseen force. The path, I had just driven down no longer existed. All that remained was a dark, twisted forest with no end in sight. The car, the headlights, none of it mattered now. The world around me had shifted into something unfamiliar, something unnatural. I tried to steer, but the wheel felt heavy, like it was fighting against me. I could feel the car being pulled, not by any force I could understand, but by something else. Something dark, something that wanted to hold me here. In the distance, I saw them. The eyes. At first, they were just glimmers, tiny pinpricks of light flickering in the trees. But then they grew larger, more distinct. Eyes, hundreds of them, scattered throughout the forest, watching, waiting. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears as I fought to maintain control of the vehicle. The headlights flickered as I struggled to navigate through the shifting woods. But the eyes were always there, always watching. I swerved again, my grip on the steering wheel tightening, but I couldn't escape them. I could feel the presence behind me, the invisible force that was guiding my every move, pushing me deeper into the heart of this forsaken place. I glanced at the rearview mirror, hoping to see something, anything, that might explain this nightmare. But all I saw was the empty road behind me. Empty, except for the car. The same car. The one that had been following me. It had reappeared. I froze. I couldn't bring myself to look again, but I couldn't look away either. The headlights were still there, their bright glow blinding. And I felt the car creeping closer, its presence suffocating, pulling me into its grip. I slammed on the brakes again, forcing the car to a halt. The forest around me felt suffocating. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with panic. The air had become thick, as if something was pressing down on me, trapping me in a vice. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. The car. That car. It wasn't just following me. It was waiting for me. The moment I stepped out, I knew I would never be the same. But before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, a sharp knock on the window made me jump, my whole body seizing with terror. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to face whatever nightmare was standing on the other side. But I had to. I had to see it. I slowly turned my head, my neck stiff with fear. There, just outside the window, stood the man. His face closer now, his features more defined in the harsh glow of my headlights. He wasn't just a figure anymore. He was real. And he was here. His expression hadn't changed. It was still that same unsettling, vacant stare. But now I could see the details. The wrinkles that seemed too deep, too unnatural for a man his age. The way his skin looked stretched too tight over his bones. His clothes were old, frayed at the edges, and there was something about him that made my stomach churn. He didn't look like a man at all. He looked wrong. He lifted his hand, and I could see that his fingers were too long, unnaturally long. His nails were sharp, too sharp, like claws. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as he reached for the door handle. I yanked on the door, but it wouldn't open. The door had jammed. My pulse raced, and I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling. But the lock didn't budge. The man didn't seem to care. His eyes never left me, not for a single second. He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging up the glass. The stench that hit me was enough to make my stomach turn. Rotting flesh, decay, the smell of something long dead. "You can't escape," he whispered, his voice soft and deadly calm. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, freezing me to the bone. His words hung in the air like a curse, and before I could react, he vanished from the window, disappearing into the night, as if he had never been there at all. But I could still feel him. I could feel his presence. I glanced around, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle again. This time, the door opened. Without thinking, I shoved it open, throwing myself out of the car. I didn't care what was out there anymore. I had to run. I had to get away. But the forest, it wasn't just a forest. It was alive. And it was closing in on me. The trees seemed to shift and sway as I ran. The ground beneath me soft and uneven. I could feel the eyes again watching, stalking me from the shadows. I could hear the sound of something following me. Its steps light and quick, too quick. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled through the darkness. But every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw nothing. Nothing but the endless night. I had always imagined that if I ever found myself in a nightmare, I would wake up right when it got too terrifying. Right when I felt my heart would burst out of my chest. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was real. And it felt worse. So much worse. Because I couldn't wake up from it. I didn't know how far I had run. How long I had been stumbling through the woods. But my body felt like it was giving up on me. My legs were heavy. The ground beneath me soft and treacherous. And my breath came in ragged gasps. Every step I took seemed to take me deeper into the forest. But no matter how fast or how far I ran, the feeling of being chased never left. It was there, always just behind me, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. I couldn't even hear my footsteps anymore. The silence was too thick. It pressed in on me, suffocating me, until I couldn't tell if the world had stopped making sound or if I had simply become numb to it. And then I heard it. A whisper. At first it was just a fleeting sound, like the wind teasing the edges of my consciousness. But then it grew, louder, clearer. A voice. And that voice, it wasn't human. It was cold, distant, like something from beyond the grave. You can't run. My blood turned to ice, and I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell face first into the damp earth. I tried to breathe, tried to force my legs to move again, but something held me in place. It was like the forest itself had grown sentient, and the very trees were watching, waiting for me to make the next move. I turned my head quickly, looking for any sign of life, anything that could explain the voice, the strange presence I felt closing in on me. But the forest was still, deathly still. No creatures, no birds, no rustling of leaves. Just the oppressive silence and the weight of eyes that I couldn't see but felt nonetheless. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. A shape moved in the darkness, just at the edge of my vision. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, indistinct and fleeting. But as it drew closer, I saw it more clearly. A figure, humanoid in shape, but its features were warped, indistinguishable. The outline was jagged, like it was being stretched and pulled in unnatural directions. I couldn't breathe. My mouth felt dry as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But no matter how hard I focused, the figure refused to come into focus. It was like my brain couldn't comprehend its shape, as though it was something beyond human understanding. And then it spoke again. "You're not supposed to be here." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. My legs felt like they were stuck in mud. my feet frozen to the ground, as if the earth itself had claimed me. I forced my eyes to stay open, forcing myself to look at the figure in front of me. But it was as if my vision was being blocked, like I could see it only in brief, disjointed flashes, as if reality itself were bending and shifting around it. And then it took a step closer. I was about to turn and flee, if only I could. But then, something caught my eye. Something shiny, something that reflected the faint moonlight. I looked down at my feet, and there it was. The car key, my car key, lying in the dirt. How had it gotten here? I didn't remember dropping it. Didn't remember even having it with me when I left the car. Yet there it was, gleaming like a beacon in the shadows. I reached for it instinctively, my fingers trembling as I grasped the cool metal. As soon as my hand closed around the key, a cold rush of air hit me, carrying with it the scent of decay, of something long dead. The ground beneath me trembled as if it too was alive. The figure's presence grew stronger, closer, and with each step it took, the air around me grew heavier, more suffocating. My chest tightened, as though someone was pressing a weight against my ribcage. Leave this place. Its voice was a command, but it was more than that. It was an invitation to surrender, to give in. I felt its power wrapping around me, pulling at the edges of my mind, tempting me to fall into the darkness. And for a moment, I wanted to. I wanted to stop fighting, to stop running, but something inside me resisted. The key. It wasn't just a car key. It was my connection to the world outside this nightmare. It was my lifeline. And if I didn't hold on to it, I didn't know if I would ever make it out. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to take a step back, and then another. My feet were still heavy, the ground shifting beneath me like it wanted to swallow me whole. But I moved. 1 step, 2 steps. I forced my body to obey, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the presence that was closing in on me. The figure stopped in its tracks, its form flickering like an image on a broken TV screen. It was trying to follow me. I could feel it. But I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let it drag me into whatever hell it had waiting for me. But then, something else happened. A flash of light. I blinked, disoriented, my vision swimming as the brightness nearly blinded me. The darkness was pushed back, and for a moment, I could see, really see, the forest again. The trees, the ground. Everything was clear. And standing there, just a few feet in front of me, was the car. My car. The one I had left behind. It was a perfect illusion, a trick of the mind, or so I thought. But when I looked closer, I saw the truth. The car wasn't just there. It was moving. Slowly but surely it began to roll toward me. The engine started up with a low, guttural rumble, the headlights cutting through the darkness. And then, a voice. Not from the figure, but from the car. Get in. I didn't think. I didn't even hesitate. I ran toward the car, grabbing the handle, yanking the door open, and throwing myself inside. The instant I was inside, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing me off from whatever nightmare had been chasing me. The car jerked forward, the tires kicking up dirt as it sped down the narrow, winding path. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. But as the car drove me further into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. Something that would never let me go. Something that was still watching me from the darkness. And then, as I glanced into the rearview mirror, I saw it again. The eyes, hundreds of them, watching, Waiting, always waiting. The nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. The car sped through the twisting, fog-choked road, but the air inside felt still, almost suffocating. I wasn't sure how long I had been driving, how far I had gone. Time had become irrelevant, consumed by the weight of what had happened, what was still happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, that the trees were whispering and shifting around me, watching me as I passed by. But I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to let myself look back. The headlights of my car cut through the fog, illuminating nothing but the dark, endless stretch of road ahead. The grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles paled as I focused on keeping the car steady. My mind kept drifting, fragments of the night's horrors flashing through my thoughts like broken pieces of a nightmare. The voice, the figure, everything felt too real to be a dream, too haunting to ignore. I couldn't remember exactly how I got to this point, how I'd ended up in this forsaken place. It was as if the world had shifted around me, leaving me stuck in some kind of limbo. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to keep driving, to get out of the woods, but every turn seemed to take me deeper into the darkness. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being pulled into a place I didn't belong. The silence of the car was unnerving. I'd always hated silence, especially after everything that had happened. There was something about it, the way it pressed in on you, suffocating you. My mind was racing, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a way out of this. And then it happened again. I wasn't sure what made me glance at the rearview mirror. Maybe it was a sudden, irrational need to reassure myself that I was truly alone, that nothing was following me anymore. But the moment my eyes locked onto the mirror, my heart lurched in my chest. The car was there again. I could see the headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt, a dim glow in the distance. At first, it looked like the same car, the one I had seen earlier, the one that had been following me through the woods. But this time, it wasn't just behind me. It was beside me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. The figure was there, somewhere in the shadows, watching me. I could feel its presence, even though I didn't dare look. I kept my focus on the road, my grip tightening on the wheel until my fingers ached. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was still scared, that I had imagined it. But deep down I knew the truth. It was real. The air around me thickened again, heavier than before. The fog pressed closer, swirling in the headlights like a living thing. And then I heard it, the soft scrape of tires against gravel, as if something or someone was moving in the mist, inching closer with every passing second. I knew I had to get away. I had to. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, pushing the car to its limits, but it felt like the road itself was stretching out before me, never ending, pulling me deeper into the darkness. Every turn, every curve only made it worse. That's when I saw it, a figure, standing by the side of the road, motionless, as if it had been waiting there for me. The figure was just a silhouette, a shadow against the thick fog. I could barely make out the shape. A man, or something like man. His form was unnaturally still, his outline jagged, like the image was glitching, distorting. The closer I got, the clearer it became that he wasn't human at all. His face, or what I could make out of it, was twisted and malformed. His features were stretched as though someone had pulled them too tightly, distorting them beyond recognition. His eyes, however, were the worst part. They weren't just empty, like I had seen before. They were watching me. I could feel them, cold, unblinking, full of some kind of malicious intent. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to hit the brakes and turn the wheel, to escape this nightmare. But my body wouldn't move. My hands were locked in place on the steering wheel. My feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. The figure stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was struggling to keep its form intact. As it took a step, I felt the pressure around me increase, the air thickening as though something was closing in. The fog swirled violently now, the dark shapes around me moving, flickering in and out of view. Like they were alive. I wasn't in control anymore. I knew that. I had lost control the moment I drove onto this road. It was no longer just a road. It was a trap, a snare, designed to pull me deeper into the madness. The figure moved faster now, a blur of motion, and then there was a loud thud against the side of the car. My heart nearly stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed my foot down on the brake, but the car didn't respond. It kept moving forward faster now, as if something was pushing it. Something that didn't care about my fear, my panic, my desperate attempts to get away. I looked at the mirror again. The car was still there, but now it was closer, much closer. The headlights were blinding now, reflecting off the fog, making it hard to see anything. The figure was gone, but I could still hear it. Its movement, its breath, its presence. So close, I could feel it against my skin. Suddenly, the road in front of me began to shift. The asphalt cracked, splitting open like a wound in the earth. I tried to steer, to avoid the gaping chasm that had opened before me. But the car didn't obey. The wheel jerked violently, as though it had a mind of its own, and then the car stopped. The sudden stillness was deafening. I looked around, my chest heaving, as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The road was gone, replaced by an empty black void. There was nothing around me, just the cold, oppressive darkness. The car was no longer moving, but the feeling of being watched, of being trapped, was stronger than ever. I turned to look out the window, the fog still swirling. But there was something else now. A shadow, slowly moving toward the car. A figure, much like the one I had seen earlier. But this time, it was different. It was bigger, more solid, its features clearer in the dim light. And then, it spoke. "You can't escape." The words were cold, final. And in that moment, I understood. I had been brought here for a reason. The road had led me here, had pulled me into this place of darkness, and there was no way out. The figure took another step forward. I could see its face now, fully. And what I saw was a face I recognized. It was mine.